The Enfield Poltergeist, 1977. Sound of old cassette tape static crackling. My name is Amy Thornton. I'm 59 years old, and I'm about to tell you something I've kept buried for 48 years. In the summer of 1977, when I was 11 years old, something came into our house at 284 Green Street in Enfield, North London. It said its name was Walter Grimm. It said it had been dead for 53 years, and it said I belonged to him. This is what happened during those 53 nights. I'm only telling this story now because last week my daughter, she's 11, the same age, I was woke up at 2:17 in the morning. She said she heard knocking. 3 knocks, she told me, coming from inside her bedroom wall. And when I went to check on her, I saw them. Handprints on her wall. Long, thin fingers, like an old man's hands. Tape clicks off. Narrator voice begins. Welcome to the Enfield haunting, a true story of one of the most documented paranormal cases in history. What you're about to hear is based on over 200 hours of audio recordings, official police reports, medical documentation, and survivor testimony. Every event described has been verified by multiple witnesses. Every claim has been cross-referenced against historical records. This is not fiction. This is not folklore. This is what happened at 284 Green Street between August 30th and November 18th, 1977. This is part 1, the first night. Tape clicks on Amy's Voice 2025, August 30th, 1977. That was the night everything changed. I remember my mom had just left for her night shift at St. Mary's Hospital. It was just me, my older sister Sarah, and my 2 younger brothers Michael and Tommy in the house. We were completely alone. And at exactly 2:17 in the morning, we heard it for the first time. The knocking. But I need to go back. I need to explain why we couldn't just leave, why we were trapped there night after night with no one to help us. Narrator Eleanor Thornton was 38 years old in the summer of 1977. She had 4 children, Sarah, 13 years old, Amy, 11, Michael, 10, and Tommy, 7. Eleanor's husband had left 3 years earlier, moved to America, and never contacted the family again. There were no relatives nearby. Eleanor's parents had died when she was young, and she had no siblings. To support her children, Eleanor worked the night shift at St. Mary's Hospital, 18 kilometers from their home in Enfield. She worked 6 nights a week from 10 o'clock at night until 6 in the morning. During those 8 hours, the children were completely alone. Money was desperately tight. Eleanor couldn't afford a babysitter. She couldn't afford to move to a different house. The lease on 284 Green Street still had 14 months remaining, and breaking it early would cost £800, 2 months' salary money she simply didn't have. The telephone had been disconnected in July because Eleanor couldn't pay the bill. The nearest public phone box was 400 meters away, far too distant for children to reach safely in the middle of the night. They were isolated, trapped, with no way to call for help. Amy interview. People always ask me, why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you run to a neighbor? They don't understand. The house next to ours on the left was empty, undergoing renovations. The house on the right belonged to an 80-year-old woman who was almost completely deaf. The family across the street had gone on holiday for the entire month of August. During those nights when my mom was at work, there was no one within shouting distance who could hear us scream. We were completely alone, and whatever was in that house with us knew it. Narrator, 284 Green Street was built in 1920, a 2-story brick house at the end of a narrow alley off the main road. The house had been divided into 2 floors ground level, with a small living room and cramped kitchen, and upstairs with 2 bedrooms. There was also a basement, damp and moldy, used only for storing old furniture. At night, the street was almost pitch black. The single street light at the corner had been broken since July, and the council hadn't repaired it. To reach the house, you had to walk down a 30-meter alley with no lighting at all. Inside the house was old and deteriorating. The walls were covered with peeling paint. The floorboards creaked with every step. The upstairs hallway had only one weak 40-watt bulb that flickered constantly due to unstable voltage. When that light was turned off, the darkness was absolute. The smell was distinctive. Damp mold rose from the basement, seeping through the floorboards. The old wooden wardrobe in the girl's bedroom, over 60 years old, left behind by previous tenants, emitted a musty odor of rotting wood. Paint chips and plaster dust gave the air a chalky taste. During the day, ordinary sounds filled the house. Every 45 minutes, a train passed on tracks 500 meters away, causing a low rumble through the foundations. The old plumbing system made knocking sounds whenever anyone used water. Wind whistled through gaps in the window frames. Mice scurried inside the walls, their tiny feet pattering against the wooden beams. These were the sounds Eleanor and her children had learned to ignore. Normal sounds. Explainable sounds. But at night, when the children were alone, every sound became sinister. What Eleanor didn't know, what no one had told her when she signed the lease, was the history of 284 Green Street. In 1924, a man named Walter Grimm had died in the upstairs bedroom, the room where Sarah and Amy now slept. He was 72 years old, living alone. He died of a cerebral hemorrhage while sitting in his chair beside the bed. His body wasn't discovered for 4 days, not until neighbors reported a terrible smell coming from the house. Walter Grimm had lived at 284 Green Street for 53 years. From 1871, when he moved in as a young man of 19, until September 12, 1924, when he died alone in that upstairs room. Between 1924 and 1977, the house had changed hands 9 times. No tenant stayed longer than 6 years. Most left within 3. No one had thought to tell Eleanor Thornton why. Amy interview. On the night of August 29, 1977, everything seemed normal. Mom made dinner fish fingers and chips. I remember that clearly. We ate together, watching television. At 9:45, Mom put on her nurse's uniform and gave us all kisses goodbye. Sarah was in charge. She was only 13, but she was mature for her age. Mom trusted her. Sarah's job was simple: make sure Michael and Tommy brushed their teeth, get everyone into bed by 10:30, and if anything went wrong, run to Mrs. Patterson next door, or to the phone box to call the police. Nothing had ever gone wrong before. We'd been doing this routine for 6 months. It was fine. It was normal. But that night, something was different. I felt it as soon as Mom closed the front door. The house felt heavier somehow, like the air pressure had changed. I remember standing in the living room, listening to Mom's footsteps fading down the alley and feeling this overwhelming sense of dread. I turned to Sarah and said, "I don't want to sleep upstairs tonight." Sarah laughed at me. She said I was being a baby. She said nothing had ever happened before, so nothing would happen tonight. I wish I'd trusted my instincts. I wish we'd all slept downstairs together. Narrator. At 10:30 p.m., Sarah herded Amy, Michael, and Tommy upstairs to bed. The 2 girls shared one bedroom, the 2 boys another. Sarah made sure everyone was tucked in, then went to her own bed in the room she shared with Amy. The house was quiet. Outside, the August night was still warm, 26 degrees Celsius even after sunset. There was no breeze, no movement, just stillness. Sarah fell asleep around 11 o'clock. Amy lay awake longer, staring at the ceiling. The bedroom was dark except for a thin strip of orange light from a distant street lamp that managed to creep through the gap in the curtains. Shadows stretched across the walls. The old wardrobe in the corner stood like a sentinel, its dark wood almost black in the dimness. Amy could hear Michael's soft snoring from the room next door. She could hear the house settling, boards creaking as they contracted in the cooling air. She could hear her own heartbeat loud in her ears. At some point she finally drifted into sleep. And then at 2:17 a.m. she woke up. Amy interview. I woke because I felt like someone had grabbed the bed frame and was shaking it violently, like an earthquake but more deliberate, more angry. The whole bed was juddering back and forth, and I was being thrown around like a rag doll. I screamed for Sarah. I must have screamed loud because Michael woke up too in the next room. He was crying, saying the same thing, that his bed was shaking, that something was wrong. Sarah came running in from our room. She hit the light switch. The 40-watt bulb flickered on, and immediately everything stopped. The bed was still. Michael had stopped crying, though his face was white with fear. Sarah looked at us like we were crazy. "What's wrong?" she demanded. "The bed was shaking," I said. My voice was shaking too, really hard, like someone was shaking it. Sarah touched the bed frame. She pushed it. It was solid. Didn't move at all. "You were dreaming," she said. "Both of you had a nightmare at the same time. It's just because you're nervous about being alone." But I knew I hadn't been dreaming. I'd been fully awake. I'd felt the violence of that shaking. It wasn't my imagination. Sarah checked on us for another minute, then sighed. "Go back to sleep," she said. "There's nothing wrong. It's just an old house. Old houses make noises and feel strange sometimes." She turned off the light and went back to her bed. But as she stepped into the hallway, I heard her pause. I heard the floorboards creak near our doorway. Then Sarah made a small sound, not quite a gasp, more like a sharp intake of breath. "What is it?" I called out. Sarah came back and switched the light on again. Her face looked pale. "Nothing," she said. I thought I heard something. Probably mice in the walls." She was lying. I could tell, but I didn't push it. I was too scared to ask what she'd really heard. Narrator. Sarah stood in the hallway after turning off the bedroom light, and she had heard something. A creaking sound like footsteps on old wooden floors. But the sound hadn't come from downstairs, where footsteps should be. It had come from inside Amy and Michael's bedroom. From the corner near the old wardrobe. Sarah had looked back into the room before closing the door. Everything was still. Amy and Michael were in their beds. The wardrobe stood in its usual place. There was no logical explanation for that sound. She told herself it must have been the floorboards settling. Old houses did that, especially in summer when the heat of the day gave way to cooler night air. Wood expanded and contracted, that was all it was. She went back to her own bed and tried to sleep, but her heart was racing. Deep down in a place she didn't want to acknowledge, Sarah knew that sound hadn't been the house settling. It had sounded too deliberate, too much like someone or something had taken a step on the floorboards inside that room. The clock on the bedside table read 2:23 a.m. Narrator. At 3:42 a.m., the screaming started again. This time it was Amy, Michael, and Tommy all crying at once. Sarah bolted upright in bed and ran to their rooms. Tommy had woken up from the noise and was sobbing in fear, not understanding what was happening. Sarah switched on the light in Amy and Michael's room. The wooden chair that had been in the corner of the room near the wardrobe was now sitting in the middle of the floor. It had moved approximately 2 meters from its original position. Amy was sitting up in bed, pointing at the chair with a trembling hand. "We heard a loud noise," she said, "and then the chair was there. It moved by itself." Sarah stared at the chair. It was an old wooden chair, probably 12 kilograms in weight, heavy enough that moving it would make noise. But Sarah hadn't heard the sound of a chair being dragged across the floor. She'd only heard the children screaming. "Michael!" Sarah said, her voice sharp with anger and fear. "Did you move that chair to scare Amy?" Michael shook his head frantically. "No, I didn't. I swear I was asleep, and then I heard a bang and the chair was there." Sarah walked over to the chair and examined it. Then she examined the floor around it. If one of the children had climbed out of bed and moved the chair, there should be footprints in the thin layer of dust on the floorboards. Sarah hadn't cleaned the upstairs for 3 days. There were no footprints. Sarah checked Michael's feet. They were clean. A cold feeling crept up Sarah's spine. She turned to look at the chair again. Really look at it. The chair was positioned exactly in the center of the room, as if someone had measured the distance carefully. It was facing the door, almost like it had been placed there deliberately for someone to see when they entered. "Maybe," Sarah said slowly, her mind grasping for any logical explanation. Maybe there was a strong gust of wind that blew through a crack in the window and pushed the chair. But even as she said it, she knew it was absurd. The windows were closed. And even if they weren't, a gust of wind strong enough to move a 12-kilogram chair would have knocked over the lighter items on the dresser, the hairbrush, the small jewelry box, the picture frame, all were undisturbed. Or maybe, Sarah continued, her voice becoming desperate, maybe the floor is uneven and the chair just slid on its own. Amy looked at her sister with wide, frightened eyes. Sarah, the floor isn't uneven, and chairs don't just slide by themselves. Sarah picked up the chair. It was heavier than she expected. She carried it downstairs to the living room. I'm taking it down here, she announced. That way it can't bother you anymore. Now, go to sleep, all of you. She turned off the light and closed the bedroom door. But as she walked down the stairs, carrying the chair, Sarah was fighting the urge to wake everyone up, pack them all into the car if they had one, and drive far away from this house. Because despite every logical explanation, she tried to force herself to believe Sarah knew the truth in her bones. Something was wrong with this house. Something was happening that couldn't be explained by wind or settling floorboards or children's nightmares. At 4:03 a.m., Sarah was lying in her bed wide awake when she heard it. Thump, thump, thump. 3 distinct knocks coming from the room where Amy and Michael slept. Amy interview. The knocking. God, the knocking. That's what I remember most clearly from that first night. It was so deliberate, so intentional. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. Like someone was trying to communicate. Like someone was saying, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. Narrator Sarah sat up in bed. The knocking continued. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like someone was striking the wall with a closed fist. Hard enough to be loud, but not hard enough to damage the plaster. Sarah got up and opened the door to Amy and Michael's room. She flicked the light switch. The knocking stopped immediately. Amy and Michael were both awake now, sitting up in their beds, staring at the wall where the sound had been coming from. You heard it too, Amy whispered. I heard it, Sarah said. The 3 of them stood there in silence, waiting. 10 seconds passed. 20, 30. Sarah turned off the light. Immediately, thump, thump, thump. Sarah's hand shot to the light switch and flipped it back on. The knocking stopped. Off, thump, 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 on. Silence. It's reacting to the light, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Amy started to cry. Sarah, what's happening? What's doing that? Sarah didn't answer. She didn't have an answer. Every rational explanation was evaporating like morning mist. This wasn't mice. This wasn't settling floorboards. This wasn't anything natural. She left the light on and stood in the doorway listening. The house was silent now except for Amy's quiet sobbing. Maybe, Sarah said, though her voice had lost all conviction, maybe it's the water pipes. Sometimes when the pressure changes at night, pipes make knocking sounds. But Sarah knew the water pipes were on the ground floor, not up here, and water pipes didn't respond to light switches. She stood there for another 5 minutes, then finally said, I'm going to get a glass of water. Stay here. Keep the light on. Sarah went downstairs to the kitchen. Her hands were shaking as she filled a glass from the tap. She drank it in 3 gulps, trying to steady her nerves. As she turned to go back upstairs, she glanced at the living room. The chair she'd brought down was where she'd left it near the sofa. Sarah started up the stairs. She paused on the 3rd step. The door to Amy and Michael's room, which she was absolutely certain she had left open, was now closed. Sarah's heart began to hammer against her ribs. She took the stairs 2 at a time and reached the bedroom door. She grabbed the handle and pushed. The door opened easily. Nothing was blocking it. Inside, Amy and Michael were still in their beds, still awake. The light was still on. Did one of you close this door? Sarah asked. They both shook their heads. Sarah felt a wave of nausea. She'd left that door open. She knew she had. and neither of the children had gotten out of bed, she would have heard them on the stairs. "I'm checking the whole house," Sarah announced. "Right now. If someone broke in, if someone's hiding somewhere, I'm going to find them." She went through every room upstairs, the bathroom, the other bedroom where Michael and Tommy usually slept, her and Amy's room, every wardrobe, every corner, under every bed. Nothing. Downstairs, the living room, the kitchen. She even opened the door to the basement, though she didn't dare go down those dark steps alone. The house was empty. All the windows were closed and latched from the inside. The front and back doors were locked. Sarah returned upstairs. Amy, Michael, and now Tommy were all huddled together on Amy's bed, their eyes wide with fear. "There's no one here," Sarah said, but her voice was hollow. Because if there was no one here, then what was making those sounds? What had moved the chair? What had closed that door? At 4:10 a.m., Sarah made a decision. "We're all going downstairs, right now. We're going to sleep in the living room together, all of us." "What about Michael's and Tommy's room?" Amy asked. "Leave it. We're not sleeping upstairs anymore tonight." They gathered pillows and blankets and trooped downstairs. Sarah turned on every light in the living room. All 4 children settled on the floor on makeshift beds of cushions and blankets. But before Sarah could lie down herself, Amy grabbed her arm. "Sarah, look." Amy was pointing at the ceiling, at the light fixture hanging there. It was swaying, not dramatically, not like someone had bumped it, but gently, rhythmically, as if someone had set it in motion and was keeping it going. There was no breeze, no vibration from a passing train. The light just swayed back and forth, back and forth. Sarah stared at it. She felt something break inside her, some final wall of rationality crumbling away. "Sarah," Amy whispered, "I want Mom." "Mom will be home in 2 hours," Sarah said. Her voice sounded strange, even to herself, flat, distant. "We just have to wait, just 2 more hours." They sat together in the living room, huddled under blankets, all the lights blazing, and waited for Eleanor to come home. None of them slept. At 5:30 a.m., they heard the key turn in the front door lock. Eleanor pushed open the door, exhausted from her night shift. She stepped into the house and immediately stopped. All 4 of her children were sitting in the living room, wide awake, pale as ghosts, staring at her with expressions of profound relief and terror. "What happened?" Eleanor asked. Sarah stood up. She opened her mouth to explain, but where did she even start? With the shaking beds, the moving chair, the knocking that responded to light, the closed door, the swaying light. "Mum," Sarah said, and her voice cracked. "Something's wrong with the house." Amy interview. "Mum didn't believe us at first. I could see it in her eyes. She thought we'd scared ourselves, that we'd let our imaginations run wild. She was tired from working all night and she just wanted to sleep. She kept saying things like, 'Old houses make strange noises and your minds play tricks on you when you're alone at night.'" But Sarah insisted. Sarah told her everything in detail, the exact sequence of events, the things that couldn't be explained away. And finally Mum agreed to come upstairs and check. We all went up together. Mum opened the door to my and Michael's room. Everything looked normal. The beds were still there. The wardrobe was in its place. There was nothing obviously wrong. But then Mum walked over to the wardrobe. She opened it to hang up her coat, and she saw it. On the inside of the wardrobe door there was a mirror, and on that mirror, written in what looked like condensation, like someone had breathed on the glass and written with their finger, were 2 words, 53 years. The writing was shaky, like an old person's handwriting. The letters were uneven, some larger than others. Mom reached out and wiped the words away with her hand. They smeared and disappeared, but then, as we watched, the condensation reformed, and the words appeared again. 53 years. Mom wiped them away again, and again they reappeared. She closed the wardrobe door and turned to look at us. Her face had gone completely white. "Everyone downstairs," she said quietly. "Now." We went back to the living room. Mom didn't say anything for a long time. She just sat on the sofa, staring at nothing, her hands clasped together tightly. Finally, Sarah said, "Mom, what does it mean, 53 years?" Mom shook her head. I don't know. But I could tell she was lying. Or at least I could tell that she had an idea she didn't want to voice out loud. Because once you say something out loud, it becomes real. Narrator: Eleanor told her children to get some sleep. She told them everything would be fine. She told them it was probably just a strange coincidence, or maybe someone was playing a prank. But Eleanor didn't sleep. She sat in the living room as dawn light began to filter through the windows, and she thought about those words. 53 years. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, after the children had finally fallen asleep, Eleanor walked alone to the Enfield Public Library. She asked the librarian if there were any records about the history of 284 Green Street. The librarian directed her to the local archives. Eleanor spent 2 hours going through old documents and records. And then she found it. A death certificate from September 1924. Walter Grimm, age 72, address 284 Green Street, Enfield. Cause of death, cerebral hemorrhage. Date of death, September 12, 1924. Further research revealed property records. Walter Grimm had moved into 284 Green Street in 1871. He had lived there until his death in 1924. 1924 minus 1871 equals 53 years. Eleanor closed the record book. Her hands were trembling. She walked home in a daze. When she arrived, the children were awake eating cereal in the kitchen. "Mom," Amy asked, "are you okay?" Eleanor forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Everything's fine." But nothing was fine, because Eleanor now knew that someone had written those words on the mirror. Someone who knew exactly how long they'd lived in that house before they died. Walter Grimm had lived at 284 Green Street for 53 years, and now 53 years after his death, he was letting them know he was still there. That night, Eleanor called in sick to work. She couldn't leave her children alone in that house, not anymore, not after what she'd learned. They all slept downstairs together, lights on, huddled close, waiting, listening. At 2:17 a.m., the knocking started again. Thump, thump, thump. This time it was louder, and it wasn't coming from upstairs. It was coming from right above them, from the ceiling, as if something was standing on the floor of the bedroom directly above where they lay, and it was knocking on the floor, trying to get their attention. Eleanor gathered her children close, and for the first time she whispered the truth she'd been trying to deny. "We need help." Amy interview 2025. "People ask me, why didn't you just leave? We tried. On September 1st, we ran out of the house at 4 in the morning and called the police. And that's when things got official. Because what happened that night was witnessed by police officers, and they wrote a report. A report that's still on file today." Narrator: This is part 2, The Witnesses, where the Enfield haunting went from a family's private nightmare to one of the most documented paranormal cases in history. Narrator: On the evening of August 31st, 1977, Eleanor Thornton made a decision. She would not go to work. She would not leave her children alone in that house again. She called St. Mary's Hospital and told them she was sick. It was a lie, but it was the only lie that made sense. How could she tell them the truth? That she couldn't come to work because something was knocking on the walls of her house. That words appeared on mirrors. That chairs moved by themselves. They would think she was losing her mind. Eleanor gathered blankets and pillows and made beds for all 4 children in the living room. She kept every light on. The electricity bill would be astronomical, but she didn't care. The darkness felt dangerous now. "We're all sleeping down here tonight," she announced. Together. Amy looked at her mother's face and saw something she'd never seen before. Fear. Real, undisguised fear. Her mother, who had always been strong, always had answers, looked terrified. "Mom," Amy said quietly, "what did you find at the library?" Eleanor hesitated. She looked at her 4 children, all staring at her with wide eyes, waiting for an explanation that would make sense of the nightmare they were living through. "A man died in this house," Eleanor said finally, "in 1924. His name was Walter Grimm. He lived here for 53 years before he died. That's what the writing meant. 53 years. Sarah's face went pale. "He died in our room, didn't he? In mine and Amy's room?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "How did he die?" Michael asked. "Brain hemorrhage? He was sitting in a chair by the bed. They didn't find him for 4 days. Tommy started to cry. He was only 7, and the idea of a dead man in the house, even one who had died more than 50 years ago, was too much for him to process. Amy felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. She remembered the corner of the bedroom near the wardrobe, the spot that always felt colder than the rest of the room, the spot where she sometimes felt like someone was watching her. That was where he died. Narrator. At 9 o'clock that evening, the family ate a quiet dinner. No one had much appetite. Eleanor tried to act normal, tried to pretend everything would be fine, but her hands shook as she served the food. At 10 o'clock, Eleanor turned off the television. "Time for bed," she said. "We're all staying down here together. If anything happens, we're right next to each other." The children settled onto their makeshift beds on the living room floor. Eleanor sat on the sofa, fully dressed, wide awake. She had no intention of sleeping. The house was quiet. Outside, the August night was still warm. Inside, with all the lights blazing, it almost felt normal, almost safe. At 11:30, the knocking began. Thump, thump, thump. It came from upstairs, from the bedroom directly above the living room. All 4 children sat bolt upright. Eleanor stood, her heart racing. Amy, interview. That second night, the knocking was different. It was louder, angrier, like whatever was making the sound was furious that we hadn't gone upstairs, like it was demanding our attention. Narrator. The knocking continued. Thump, 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 pause, thump, thump, thump. The rhythm was identical to the previous night. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. Eleanor looked at the ceiling. The light fixture began to sway just as it had done the night before. "Stay here," Eleanor said to the children. "I'm going to check." "Mom, no." Sarah grabbed her mother's arm. "Don't go up there alone." But Eleanor pulled free. She had to know. She had to see for herself what was causing this. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking under her weight. The upstairs hallway was dark. She'd turned off that light to save electricity. Eleanor reached for the switch and flicked it on. The 40-watt bulb flickered to life. The knocking stopped. Eleanor stood at the top of the stairs, listening. Silence. She walked to the doorway of Sarah and Amy's room and looked inside. Everything was exactly as they'd left it. The beds were made. The wardrobe stood closed in the corner. Nothing had moved. Eleanor walked into the room. The air felt thick, heavy. She could smell something faint, not the usual mustiness of the old house, but something else, something organic and unpleasant, like damp earth, like decay. She walked to the wardrobe and opened it. The mirror on the inside of the door was clear. No condensation, no words. Eleanor closed the wardrobe and turned to leave. The light in the hallway went out. She froze. The bulb hadn't burned out, it had simply switched off, as if someone had flipped the switch. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She stood in the darkened bedroom, her back to the wardrobe, and felt the temperature drop. It happened so quickly it was like stepping into a freezer. Her breath came out in visible puffs of white vapor. Behind her, from inside the closed wardrobe, came a sound, breathing, not the creaking of old wood, not the house settling, but breathing, deep, raspy, labored breathing like an old man with damaged lungs. Eleanor spun around. The wardrobe door was still closed, but the breathing continued, from inside, growing louder. Amy interview. Mom told me later what happened up there. She said she heard breathing coming from inside the wardrobe. And then She felt something she'd never felt before in her life. She said it felt like there were hands on her back, cold hands pushing her. Not hard enough to knock her down, but enough to make her stumble forward. There was no one behind her, but she felt those hands as clearly as if someone were standing right there touching her. Narrator. Eleanor stumbled forward away from the wardrobe. She didn't think. She just ran. Out of the bedroom, down the hallway, down the stairs, her feet barely touching the steps. She burst into the living room, gasping for air, her face white as paper. The children stared at her in terror. "What happened?" Sarah asked. "Mom, what did you see?" Eleanor couldn't speak for a moment. She stood there trembling, trying to catch her breath. Finally she said, "We're leaving, right now. Get your shoes on." "Where are we going?" Michael asked. "The phone box. We're calling the police." Narrator. At 4:22 a.m. on September 1st, 1977, Eleanor Thornton dialed 999 from the public telephone box 400 meters from her house. Her children stood huddled around her in their pajamas and jackets. "Police, please," Eleanor said when the operator answered. "There's someone in my house. I don't know who they are, but there's someone there." The operator asked for her address, asked if she'd seen the intruder, asked if anyone was hurt. Eleanor tried to explain, but how could she? How could she tell them that she hadn't seen anyone, but she'd felt hands on her back, that she'd heard breathing from inside a closed wardrobe, that chairs moved by themselves and words appeared on mirrors? She settled for saying, "Please, just send someone, please." At 5 a.m., a police car pulled up in front of 284 Green Street. Two officers stepped out, Constable Rachel Bennett, 30 years old, with 5 years on the force, and Constable David Cole, 25 years old, with only 2 years of experience. They found Eleanor and her 4 children standing on the pavement, refusing to go back inside. Narrator reading from official police report. At approximately 0500 hours on the 1st of September 1977, we responded to a call from Mrs. Eleanor Thornton regarding a possible intruder at 284 Green Street, Enfield. Upon arrival, we found Mrs. Thornton and her 4 children standing outside the residence. Mrs. Thornton appeared distressed and stated that there was someone or something in the house making noises and moving objects. We agreed to conduct a search of the premises. Narrator. Constable Bennett and Constable Cole entered 284 Green Street with their torches, though dawn was beginning to break. Eleanor and the children waited outside. The officers searched the ground floor first. Living room, kitchen, the small toilet under the stairs. Nothing out of place. No signs of forced entry. All windows were closed and locked from the inside. They climbed to the first floor. Checked both bedrooms, the bathroom. Opened wardrobes, looked under beds, checked behind doors. The house was empty. Bennett stood in the hallway, shining her torch around. "Mrs. Thornton," she called down the stairs. "There's no one here. The house is clear." Eleanor came up the stairs with Sarah. "But there is something here," Eleanor insisted. "I heard it. I felt it." Bennett exchanged a glance with Cole. They'd dealt with cases like this before. Stressed single mothers, overactive imaginations, children playing pranks. It was almost always nothing. "Mrs. Thornton," Bennett said gently, "I understand you're worried, but there's no evidence of an intruder. All your doors and windows are locked from the inside. There's no one here but you and your children." "Look at this," Eleanor said. She walked to Sarah and Amy's bedroom and opened the wardrobe. "Look at the mirror." Bennett looked. The mirror was clear, clean, no condensation, no writing. "Last night there were words on this mirror," Eleanor said desperately. "They said 53 years. They kept appearing even when I wiped them off." Bennett could see the wall beside the wardrobe. There were handprints on the wall, several of them scattered at different heights. Long, thin fingerprints. "Those handprints," Bennett said. "When did they appear?" "I don't know," Eleanor admitted. "I noticed them yesterday, but they weren't there before." Bennett took out her notebook and walked closer to examine the prints. They were odd. The fingers seemed unusually long and thin. She reached out and touched one of the prints. Her hand recoiled immediately. The print was ice cold. Not just cool from being on a wall in a house without central heating, but genuinely cold, as if it had been made by something frozen. "Cole," Bennett called. "Come feel this." Cole touched the handprint. His eyes widened. "That's not normal," he said quietly. Bennett pulled out her camera and photographed the prints. Misses. "Thornton, has anyone else been in this house? Anyone who might have touched this wall?" "No one, just us." "Could one of the children have made these prints?" Eleanor held up Amy's hand next to one of the prints. Amy's fingers were much shorter, much thicker. The proportions were completely different. Sarah tried next. Her hand was closer in size, but still too small. The prints on the wall had been made by someone with abnormally long, thin fingers. Bennett was about to suggest they go downstairs when they all heard it. From the ground floor, from the living room. Crash. They all rushed down the stairs. My interview. "I was standing outside with Michael and Tommy when we heard the crash from inside the house. We heard Mum scream, and then we heard the police officers shouting. I grabbed Tommy's hand, and we just stood there frozen, not knowing what to do." Narrator. "In the living room, a wooden dining chair had been knocked over. It lay on its side in the middle of the floor." "Did anyone else come in here?" Bennett demanded. Eleanor shook her head. "No one. We were all upstairs. You were with us." Cole walked around the chair, examining it. "Mrs. Thornton, this house is old. Could there be structural issues? Maybe vibrations from underground trains or heavy traffic causing things to fall?" "There are no underground trains here," Eleanor said, "and the nearest main road is half a kilometer away." Bennett picked up the chair and set it upright. It was solid wood, heavy. Not something that would tip over easily. She was about to speak when something else happened. Another chair, the one near the window, began to tilt, slowly, deliberately. All five of them watched as the chair leaned to one side, balanced impossibly on two legs for a moment, then slid forward across the floor. It moved approximately 70 centimeters before stopping. No one was near it. No one had touched it. The floor was level. Bennett could see that clearly. The chair had moved by itself. Narrator reading from official police report. "At approximately 0600 hours, while in the living room of 284 Green Street, I witnessed a wooden chair move across the floor with no apparent physical force applied. The chair tilted onto two legs, then slid forward approximately 70 centimeters before resting upright again. I inspected the floor and found it to be level with no slope that could have caused the movement. I examined the chair and found no hidden mechanisms or devices that could have caused it to move. I have no rational explanation for what I observed. Constable D. Cole was present and witnessed the same event." Narrator. Constable Bennett stood in that living room staring at the chair and felt her understanding of reality beginning to fracture. She had been a police officer for 5 years. She'd seen drug addicts hallucinating, she'd dealt with domestic violence and mental health crises, she'd investigated break-ins and assaults. But she had never seen an object move by itself. "We need to file a report," she said quietly to Cole. "About what?" Cole whispered back. "About a chair that moved by itself. They'll think we've lost our minds." "I know what I saw," Bennett said. "And you saw it too. We have to report this." Eleanor had sunk onto the sofa, her face in her hands. Sarah sat beside her, one arm around her mother's shoulders. Amy, Michael, and Tommy had come back inside and were standing in the doorway, eyes wide. "Mrs. Thornton," Bennett said, "I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know what's happening in this house. But I believe you when you say something is wrong. I'm going to report what we've seen today. And I'm going to recommend that you contact the Society for Psychical Research. They investigate cases like this." "Cases like what?" Eleanor asked, her voice hollow. "What is this?" Bennett hesitated. She wasn't supposed to speculate. She wasn't supposed to put ideas in people's heads, but she'd seen that chair move. She'd felt the ice-cold handprints on the wall. "I think," Bennett said carefully, "that your house might be experiencing what's called a poltergeist. It's German for noisy ghost. It's a phenomenon where objects move, noises occur, things happen that can't be explained by normal means." "A ghost," Eleanor said flatly. "You think there's a ghost in my house?" "I think," Bennett corrected, "that something is happening here that requires investigation by people who understand these phenomena better than I do." Narrator. After the police left, Eleanor sat on the sofa with her children and tried to process what had just happened. A police officer, an official representative of law and order, had just told her that her house might be haunted. It should have sounded absurd. It should have been easy to dismiss. But Eleanor had heard the breathing from the wardrobe. She'd felt those cold hands on her back. She'd seen words appear on a mirror. She'd watched a chair move by itself. Something was in this house. Something that had lived here for 53 years and had died here and apparently had never left. Walter Grimm. "Mom," Sarah said quietly, "what are we going to do?" Eleanor looked at her daughter. Sarah was only 13 years old. She shouldn't have to deal with this. None of them should. "I don't know," Eleanor admitted, "but we can't stay here, not until we figure out what's happening." For the next 3 days, Eleanor and the children stayed with Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor. Mrs. Patterson was deaf and had slept through all the disturbances, but she was kind enough to take them in when Eleanor explained they were having problems with the house. Eleanor used those 3 days to make phone calls. She contacted the Society for Psychical Research just as Constable Bennett had recommended. She spoke to a representative who took down all the details of what had happened and said they would send an investigator. She also contacted the Daily Mirror newspaper. It felt wrong going to the press. Eleanor hated the idea of publicity of strangers knowing about their private nightmare. But the representative from the Society for Psychical Research had told her that media attention sometimes helped. It brought in experts. It got people's attention. It made the case harder to dismiss or ignore. On September 2nd, a journalist named Tom Hayes from the Daily Mirror called Eleanor back. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, "I'd like to come out and interview you. Bring a photographer. Document what's been happening." "I don't want to be famous," Eleanor said. "I just want help." "I understand," Hayes said. "But trust me, if what you're describing is real, you need people to know about it. You need witnesses. You need documentation. Otherwise, everyone will think you're crazy." Eleanor agreed reluctantly. On September 3rd, Tom Hayes and photographer Chris Morgan arrived at 284 Green Street. Eleanor and the children had returned to the house that morning, hoping that maybe the 3-day absence had ended whatever was happening. It hadn't. Narrator Tom Hayes was 34 years old and had been a journalist for 12 years. He'd covered everything from political scandals to celebrity interviews to crime investigations, but he'd never covered anything like this. He sat in Eleanor Thornton's living room taking notes as she described everything that had happened. The shaking beds, the moving chair, the knocking that responded to light, the words on the mirror, the breathing from the wardrobe, the handprints on the wall. Chris Morgan, the photographer, was more skeptical. He'd seen plenty of hoaxes in his career. People who faked paranormal activity for attention or money. He made his skepticism clear. Mrs. Thornton Morgan said, "I'm going to be blunt. How do I know your children aren't playing tricks? Kids fake this stuff all the time." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "My children are terrified. Look at them. Does that look like they're playing a game?" Morgan looked at the 4 children huddled together on the sofa. Amy's eyes had dark circles under them. She clearly hadn't slept properly in days. Michael was pale and jumpy, flinching at every small sound. Tommy kept crying for no apparent reason, and Sarah, who was trying to be brave, had a haunted look in her eyes. "All right," Morgan said. "Show me the room where most of this has happened." They went upstairs to Sarah and Amy's bedroom. Morgan examined everything with a critical eye. He checked the windows for hidden wires or mechanisms. He examined the wardrobe, looking for speakers or devices that could produce sound. He measured the floor with a level to see if there was any slope that could cause objects to slide. He found nothing. "The handprints," Morgan said, pointing to the wall. "Can I photograph these?" "Of course," Eleanor said. Morgan took several photographs of the prints from different angles. He measured them, noting their unusual proportions. Then he did something unexpected. He pressed his hand against the wall next to one of the prints. His hand shot back immediately. "Jesus Christ, that's cold!" Tom Hayes, who'd been standing in the doorway, came over and felt the print himself. His expression changed. "That's not normal cold. That's like touching ice." "But there's no explanation for why that specific spot would be colder than the rest of the wall," Morgan said. He was trying to maintain his skepticism, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Amy interview. The photographer, Chris Morgan. He didn't believe us at first, I could tell. He thought we were lying, or that Mum was crazy, or that we were all in on some kind of scam. But then something happened that changed his mind. Narrator. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Tom Hayes was still interviewing Eleanor downstairs. Chris Morgan had set up his camera equipment in Sarah and Amy's bedroom, planning to take photographs of the room from various angles to document the scene. He was standing near the doorway adjusting his camera settings when he heard a sound behind him, a scraping sound, like something being dragged across the floor. Morgan spun around. The wooden chair, the same one that had moved on previous nights, was sliding across the floor, not quickly, slowly, deliberately, as if being pushed by invisible hands. Morgan's finger hit the camera shutter instinctively. Click, click, click. He fired off 3 shots in rapid succession, capturing the chair in motion. The chair stopped in the center of the room. Morgan stood frozen, his heart hammering. He'd just photographed a chair moving by itself. He had physical evidence. But even as he thought that, another part of his brain was scrambling for explanations. Vibrations from outside air pressure changes. Some kind of trickery he hadn't detected. Then something flew past his head. A small red Lego brick. It shot through the air like a bullet and smacked into the wall behind him with startling force. Morgan cried out and ducked instinctively. He spun around, looking for who had thrown it. The room was empty. The children were all downstairs. He could hear their voices. Eleanor was downstairs. Tom Hayes was downstairs. Morgan was alone in this room. Another Lego brick flew across the room. This one hit the mirror on the wardrobe door with enough force to crack the glass. Morgan ran. He scrambled out of that bedroom down the stairs, nearly tripping in his haste. Tom Hayes looked up in alarm as Morgan burst into the living room, his face white, breathing hard. "What happened?" "The chair moved," Morgan gasped, "and things started flying. I photographed it. I got pictures. But Tom, I'm telling you, there's something in that room." Narrator. That evening, Tom Hayes and Chris Morgan stayed at the house. They wanted to see if the phenomena would continue after dark. Eleanor agreed, though she insisted the children would sleep downstairs again, away from the bedrooms. At 9 o'clock, the house was quiet. Morgan had set up 2 cameras in Sarah and Amy's bedroom, positioned to capture different angles of the room. Hayes had placed audio recording equipment in the hallway and in the bedroom itself. At 11:45 p.m., the activity began. The knocking, thump, 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 coming from inside the bedroom walls. Hayes and Morgan were both upstairs, standing in the hallway, watching the closed bedroom door. The sound was unmistakable. 3 hard knocks, pause, 3 more knocks. Hayes pushed open the door. The room was empty exactly as they'd left it. But the knocking continued. It sounded like it was coming from inside the walls themselves, moving around the room. First from the wall near the wardrobe, then from the wall near the window, then from the wall shared with the other bedroom. "There must be pipes," Morgan said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Or rats in the walls." But rats didn't knock in groups of 3. Rats didn't move around the room in deliberate patterns. The knocking stopped. In the sudden silence, Hayes and Morgan stood perfectly still, listening. Then they heard it, breathing, not from inside the room, from right behind them, in the hallway. Both men spun around. The hallway was empty, but the breathing continued, close, intimate. The rasping, labored breath of someone with damaged lungs. Hayes held up his audio recorder, capturing the sound. His hands were shaking. The breathing moved. They could hear it shifting position, moving past them, going into the bedroom they'd just been watching. Hayes and Morgan followed the sound. They stepped into the bedroom, and the temperature drop hit them like a physical force. Their breath came out in white clouds of vapor. The thermometer Hayes had placed on the dresser read 7 degrees Celsius. It had been 22 degrees just minutes ago. "Chris," Hayes whispered, "are you getting this?" Morgan was photographing everything, his camera clicking in the darkness, the flash illuminating the room in brief, stark bursts. And then the drawers started opening. One by one, the drawers in the dresser slid open, no hands touching them, just sliding open smoothly as if pulled by invisible fingers. Clothes began to lift out of the drawers. Socks, shirts, underwear floating up into the air, hovering for a moment, then dropping to the floor. Morgan kept photographing. His face was white with terror, but his professional instincts had taken over. Document everything. Get the evidence. A book flew off the shelf and sailed across the room, pages fluttering. It hit the opposite wall with a thud. More objects began to move, a hairbrush, a jewelry box, a framed photograph, all lifting into the air, floating, then crashing down. And throughout it all, that breathing continued, moving around the room, sometimes close, sometimes far, always present. "We need to get out," Morgan said, his voice tight with fear. "Not yet," Hayes said. He was still recording. "We need more." A drawer shot out of the dresser, completely flying across the room like it had been pushed with tremendous force. It missed Hayes's head by centimeters and smashed into the wall behind him. "Now!" Morgan yelled. "We're leaving now!" They backed out of the room, stumbled down the stairs, and burst into the living room where Eleanor and the children were huddled together. Eleanor looked at their faces and knew immediately what had happened. "You saw it," she said quietly. "You saw what we've been living with?" Hayes nodded, still breathing hard. "Mrs. Thornton, I'm calling my editor. This story needs to be front page, and you need more help than just us. You need serious investigators." Narrator. The next morning, September 4th, Tom Hayes made 3 phone calls. The first was to his editor at the Daily Mirror, explaining what he and Morgan had witnessed and insisting that this story needed major coverage. The second was to the Society for Psychical Research, adding his voice to Eleanor's request for an investigator. The third was to a colleague who had contacts in the paranormal research community, asking for recommendations on who could help with a case of this magnitude. By that afternoon, arrangements were being made. The Daily Mirror would run the story. The Society for Psychical Research was sending one of their most experienced investigators, a man named Dr. Marcus Reed, and word was spreading through the small community of paranormal researchers in Britain and beyond. Something extraordinary was happening in Enfield. Amy interview September 5th was when Dr. Reed arrived. That's when everything changed. Because Dr. Reed wasn't like the police officers or the journalists. He didn't come to judge us or to dismiss us or even just to document what was happening. He came to understand, to investigate properly, to find out the truth. And more than that, he came to help us. Narrator Dr. Marcus Reed was 58 years old. He'd been investigating claims of paranormal activity for 25 years. In that time, he'd examined over 500 cases. Of those 500, he'd found that approximately 95% had rational explanations. Hoaxes, misunderstandings, natural phenomena misinterpreted as supernatural. But the other 5%, 25 cases out of 500, had no rational explanation. Those were the cases that had convinced Reed that something existed beyond the current understanding of science. Something that most people called ghosts or spirits or paranormal activity. Reed didn't know what these phenomena were exactly. He didn't pretend to have all the answers, but he knew they were real. He'd seen too much to doubt that. When he received the call from the Society for Psychical Research about the Thornton case, Reed read through the initial reports with growing interest. Police witnesses, journalist witnesses, photographer evidence, multiple family members all reporting consistent experiences, objects moving, temperature changes, unexplained sounds. This case had all the hallmarks of a genuine poltergeist. Reed packed his equipment, thermometers, audio recording devices, cameras, measuring tools, and drove to Enfield. Narrator Dr. Reed arrived at 284 Green Street at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on September 5th. Eleanor answered the door looking exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes told Reed she hadn't slept properly in days. "Mrs. Thornton," Reed said, shaking her hand, "I'm Dr. Marcus Reed from the Society for Psychical Research. Thank you for allowing me to investigate what's been happening here." Eleanor led him into the living room where the four children sat on the sofa, watching him with wary eyes. Reed addressed them directly. "Sarah, Amy, Michael, Tommy. I'm here to help, but I need you to understand something. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. Some of them might seem strange or even insulting. I need to investigate every possibility, including the possibility that some of what's happened might have natural explanations. That doesn't mean I think you're lying. It just means I need to be thorough. Can you understand that?" Sarah nodded. "You think we might be making it up?" "I think," Reed said carefully, "that I need to rule out every other possibility before I can confirm this is genuine paranormal activity. That's my job." Over the next 4 hours, Reed interviewed each family member separately. He asked detailed questions about what they'd experienced, when, and under what circumstances. He looked for inconsistencies in their stories, signs of collusion, indications that anyone might be fabricating or exaggerating. He found none. The children's accounts were consistent with each other and with Eleanor's. They described events in similar ways, using different words but conveying the same information. When Reed asked them to draw the layout of the rooms where things had happened, their drawings matched. When he asked them to demonstrate where they'd been standing during various incidents, their positions aligned with the physical evidence. Either this was an extraordinarily sophisticated hoax involving 4 children and their mother, or these people were telling the truth about what they'd experienced. Reed then spent 2 hours examining the house itself. He checked for hidden speakers or devices that could produce sounds. He looked for wires or mechanisms that could move objects remotely. He examined the walls for hollow spaces where someone could hide. He measured floor slopes, checked for air vents that could create drafts, tested the electrical system for faults that might cause lights to flicker or go out. He found nothing that could explain what had been reported. The handprints on the wall in Sarah and Amy's bedroom were particularly interesting. Reed photographed them from multiple angles, measured them precisely, and even took samples of the material, hoping to determine what had created the marks. When he touched one of the prints, he felt the same icy cold that others had reported. He held his hand there for several seconds, timing how long it took for the cold sensation to fade. It didn't fade. The spot remained ice cold, significantly colder than the surrounding wall, with no apparent heat source or cold source to explain the temperature difference. Reed set up his equipment throughout the house. Thermometers in each room, recording devices in the hallways and bedrooms, cameras positioned to capture different angles. He explained to Eleanor that he wanted to stay overnight to observe whether the phenomena occurred with him present. Eleanor agreed. Narrator. At 10 o'clock that evening, September 5th, everyone settled in to wait. Eleanor and the children were on the ground floor. Reed was upstairs, sitting in a chair in the hallway between the 2 bedrooms, notebook in hand, thermometers, and recording equipment surrounding him. For the first hour, nothing happened. The house was quiet except for the normal sounds of an old building, creaking boards, settling foundations, the distant rumble of a train passing. At 11:20 p.m., Reed's thermometer registered a sudden temperature drop. The hallway went from 19 degrees Celsius to 9 degrees in less than 30 seconds. Reed's breath became visible. He watched his thermometer documenting the exact time and temperature even as goosebumps rose on his arms. Then he heard it. Footsteps, not from downstairs where the family was, but from inside Sarah and Amy's bedroom. The room he knew was empty. Slow, deliberate footsteps, the creak of floorboards under weight. Reed stood up quietly. He approached the bedroom door, which stood slightly ajar. He pushed it open slowly. The room was dark. Reed flicked on his torch and shone it inside. Empty. No one there. But as he stood in the doorway, shining his torch around the room, the footsteps continued. He could hear them clearly, creak, 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 moving from the window to the wardrobe. Reed turned his torch to follow the sound. And then he saw something that made his blood run cold. In the beam of his torchlight, in the thin layer of dust on the floor, footprints were appearing, one after another. The dust was being compressed, as if by feet, creating visible impressions. But there was no one there. Reed watched frozen as the invisible footsteps crossed the room. The prints were clear, the shape of feet, the toes, the heel, adult-sized, moving steadily across the floor. The footsteps stopped near the wardrobe. Reed forced himself to move. He walked into the room, following the trail of footprints. His torch shook in his hand, but his training kept him moving forward. Document, observe, record. He reached the wardrobe and stood before it, the last footprint ending right at the base. The wardrobe door swung open. Reed stumbled backward, nearly dropping his torch. From inside the wardrobe came that sound, that breathing. The same rasping, labored breath that Tom Hayes had recorded. And then a voice, not loud, barely a whisper, but unmistakable in the silent room. "My house, lived here 53 years. The voice was male, old. The accent was London working class, but from an earlier era, the way people spoke in the 1920s. Reed's hands fumbled for his audio recorder. He pressed record, holding the device toward the wardrobe. "Who are you?" Reed asked, his voice surprisingly steady despite his racing heart. Silence. "Are you Walter Grimm? More silence than my house?" "Mr. Grimm, if that's who you are, why are you still here?" The temperature dropped further. Reed's breath came out in thick clouds. His fingers were going numb from the cold. "Alone," the voice whispered. "So long. Alone." "You don't have to be alone," Reed said. He didn't know what else to say. This was beyond his experience, beyond anything in his research. "There are people here, living people. They're frightened of you." "The girl," the voice said. "Young, alive, want her to stay." Reed felt ice crawl up his spine. "The girl, Amy. Stay with me, not alone anymore." "No," Reed said firmly. "Amy is alive. She belongs with her family. You can't keep her." A sound erupted from the wardrobe, not words, but a roar of rage. The sound was impossibly loud, filling the room, shaking the walls. The wardrobe doors slammed shut with a bang that echoed through the house. And then silence. Reed stood there, his heart hammering, his audio recorder still running. He'd just had a conversation with something that had no physical form, something that claimed to have lived in this house for 53 years, something that wanted to keep Amy. Downstairs he heard Eleanor calling his name, heard running footsteps on the stairs. Eleanor burst into the room, the children right behind her. "What happened?" "We heard a sound." "Everyone out," Reed said. His voice was sharp, authoritative. "Out of this room, now." They backed into the hallway. Reed followed, closing the bedroom door behind him. "Dr. Reed," Eleanor said, "what did you find?" Reed looked at her 4 frightened children, at this family that had been terrorized by something they didn't understand. "Mrs. Thornton," Reed said quietly, "you need to keep Amy away from that bedroom. Do not let her go in there, not until we can figure out what to do about this." "What did you hear?" Sarah asked. "We heard shouting, or roaring. What was it?" Reed hesitated, but these people deserved the truth. "I believe," Reed said slowly, "that there is an entity in this house, a presence. It identifies itself as having lived here for 53 years, which matches the information you found about Walter Grimm. And this entity seems to have become fixated on Amy specifically. It said it wants her to stay with it so that it won't be alone anymore. Amy made a small, frightened sound. Eleanor immediately pulled her daughter close. "Over my dead body," Eleanor said, her voice shaking with fury and fear. "That thing is not taking my daughter." "No," Reed agreed. "It's not. But Mrs. Thornton, I need to be honest with you. This is one of the most active cases of paranormal phenomena I've ever encountered. Whatever is here is strong. It's persistent. And it's focused. We need more help, more expertise. I'm going to contact everyone I know who has experience with cases like this. But in the meantime, you need to follow some basic rules." Reed ticked them off on his fingers. 1, Amy does not go into that bedroom. Ever. 2, no one goes upstairs alone. 3, keep lights on, especially at night. 4, if any objects move or sounds occur, call out to me immediately. "I'll be staying here from now on." "You're staying?" Michael asked. "Yes," Reed said. "I'm not leaving you alone with this." Amy interview. That was the moment I realized how serious this was. When Dr. Reed said the thing in our house wanted me to stay with it, that it didn't want to be alone anymore and thought I could, what? Keep it company, be its friend. I was 11 years old. I didn't understand what it meant, but I knew it was bad. I knew I was in danger. Part 3, The Possession. Narrator. There's a difference between being haunted and being possessed. Haunted means something is in your house. Possessed means something is in you. And on September 12th, 1977, the thing that had been living in 284 Green Street for 53 years found a way inside Amy Thornton. Amy interview, 2025. I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone. Not fully. Not even my family knows all of it. For 10 days in September 1977, I wasn't alone in my own body. And the worst part is, I remember everything. Every moment that thing was inside me, I was still there, trapped, screaming, but unable to make my body do what I wanted it to do. Narrator. September 6th through September 11th were days of escalating activity. Dr. Reed documented everything meticulously. Temperature drops averaging 15 degrees Celsius. Objects moving, books flying off shelves, drawers ejecting from furniture chairs, sliding across floors. Water appearing in puddles on the ground with no source. Small fires starting spontaneously on papers and fabrics, then extinguishing themselves without leaving burn marks. Tom Hayes and Chris Morgan returned multiple times, photographing and recording. The Daily Mirror published its first story on September 8th, The House That Terror Built, Enfield Family Claims Poltergeist Activity. The story included photographs of the moving chair, the handprints on the wall, and statements from Constable Bennett confirming her witness testimony. The publicity brought more investigators. Amateur paranormal enthusiasts showed up uninvited, wanting to see the haunted house. Eleanor had to turn most of them away. But Dr. Reed was selective about who he allowed to observe. He brought in colleagues from the Society for Psychical Research, thermal imaging specialists, audio experts who analyzed the recorded breathing sounds. Everyone who spent time in the house witnessed something they couldn't explain. But the most disturbing development was happening to Amy herself. Narrator Amy had begun to change. It was subtle at first. She became quieter, withdrawn. She would stare at walls for long periods, not responding when people spoke to her. Her appetite vanished. Eleanor had to force her to eat even a few bites at each meal. "She's traumatized, Doctor." Reed explained to Eleanor on September 10th, "Children react to extreme stress in different ways. Some become hyperactive, some become withdrawn. This is a normal psychological response to what she's been experiencing." But Eleanor wasn't sure it was just trauma. There was something about the way Amy looked at her sometimes, something in her daughter's eyes that felt wrong, distant, cold, as if Amy were looking at her through someone else's eyes. On September 11th, Amy didn't speak at all, not a single word the entire day. She sat on the sofa in the living room, staring at nothing, her hands folded in her lap. When Sarah tried to talk to her, Amy didn't respond. When Michael tried to get her to play a game, Amy didn't even look at him. Eleanor grew increasingly worried. That evening she pulled Dr. Reed aside. "Something's wrong with Amy. This isn't just stress. She's different." "Different how?" "I don't know how to explain it. She feels absent. Like she's here physically, but not mentally." Reed had noticed it too. He'd been conducting daily interviews with all family members, documenting their mental states. Amy's responses had become increasingly mechanical over the past few days. Yes, no, I don't know. Short answers with no elaboration, no emotion in her voice. "I want to bring in a child psychologist," Reed said. "Someone who can assess whether Amy is experiencing dissociation or another psychological response to trauma." "Do you think that's all it is?" Eleanor asked. "Trauma?" Reed didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the living room where Amy sat motionless on the sofa, her eyes fixed on something no one else could see. "I don't know," Reed admitted, "but I think we need to find out quickly." Narrator, September 12th, 1977. Exactly 53 years to the day after Walter Grimm had died in that upstairs bedroom. Dr. Reed noted the date in his journal that morning, along with a sense of foreboding. Anniversaries were significant in paranormal cases. Deaths, traumas, significant life events, these dates often triggered increased activity. He wasn't wrong to be concerned. At 9 o'clock that morning, Dr. Helen Carter arrived. She was 48 years old, a clinical psychologist specializing in childhood trauma. Reed had called her the previous day, explaining the situation and asking her to evaluate Amy's mental state. Carter spent an hour interviewing Amy in the living room while everyone else waited in the kitchen. When she emerged, her expression was troubled. "Dr. Reed, could I speak with you privately?" They went into the small garden behind the house. Carter pulled out her notes. "I need to be honest with you. That child is exhibiting signs of severe dissociation. She's emotionally flat, non-responsive to normal stimuli. And when I asked her certain questions about how she feels, she gave answers that concerned me." "What kind of answers?" "I asked her if she felt safe. She said, 'He says I'm safe with him.' I asked her who he was. She said, 'The man who lives here.' I asked her what man. She said, 'The old man, the one who died.'" Reed felt his stomach tighten. "She's aware of Walter Grimm." "More than aware. She talks about him like he's a real person she interacts with. She says he talks to her, that he tells her things, that he's lonely and wants her to keep him company." "Could she be having auditory hallucinations due to stress?" "Possibly. But Reed, there's something else. When I asked her if she wanted the man to leave, she hesitated. Then she said, 'He doesn't want to leave, and I don't know if I want him to.' That's not typical trauma response. That's more like attachment or identification with her perceived tormentor. Stockholm Syndrome? Maybe. Or something else entirely." Carter paused. "I need to ask you something. Do you genuinely believe there's a paranormal entity in this house?" Reed looked at her steadily. "Yes, I do." "Then I need to tell you something I wouldn't normally say in my professional capacity. That child is not just traumatized. There's something else happening. When she talks about the old man, her entire demeanor changes. Her voice drops in pitch. Her posture shifts. Her facial expressions become different, older, harder. It only lasts a few seconds at a time, but it's noticeable. It's almost like watching two different people occupying the same body." Narrator. That evening, the family ate dinner together. Amy sat at the table but didn't eat. She stared at her plate, her hands in her lap, unmoving. "Amy, sweetheart, you need to eat something," Eleanor said gently. Amy didn't respond. "Amy." Eleanor reached across the table to touch her daughter's hand. Amy's head jerked up, her eyes focused on Eleanor, and then she spoke. But the voice that came out of Amy's mouth was not the voice of an 11-year-old girl. It was deep, rough, the voice of an old man with a thick London accent from decades past. "This is my house." Everyone at the table froze. Sarah's fork clattered onto her plate. Michael made a small, frightened sound. Tommy started to cry. Amy, or the thing speaking through Amy, continued. I lived here for 53 years. I died here. This is my house. And the girl, she came to my room. She touched my things. She's mine now. Eleanor stood up so fast her chair tipped backward. Amy, can you hear me? The head turned. Amy's face looked at Eleanor, but the expression on it was wrong. The features were arranged in a configuration no child's face should make aged, bitter, angry. Your daughter is still here. She can hear you, but she can't answer. Not anymore. I'm stronger than her. Dr. Reed had his audio recorder out and running. His hands shook, but he kept the device pointed at Amy, capturing every word. Are you Walter Grimm? The head swiveled toward Reed, Amy's eyes, but not Amy's eyes, fixed on him. I am Walter Grimm, born 1852, died September 12th, 1924. This is my house. These people don't belong here. Mr. Grimm? Reed said, his voice remarkably steady. You're dead. You died 53 years ago today. This house doesn't belong to you anymore. I never left. The voice was a roar now coming from Amy's small body, but impossibly loud. I died here. In that room upstairs, I sat in my chair and my head exploded and I died. They didn't find me for 4 days. 4 days I lay there rotting. No one cared, no one came. Amy's body was shaking. Her hands gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. I understand you were alone, Reed said carefully. I understand you died alone and that must have been frightening. But Walter, may I call you Walter? You cannot keep Amy. She's a child. She has a family who loves her. She belongs with them, not with you. I've been alone for 53 years. The voice was anguished, now desperate. 53 years in this house with no one. Just silence, just darkness. And then they came, this family, with children, with life. And the girl, Amy, she's young, she's full of life. If she stays with me, I won't be alone anymore. No. Eleanor's voice cut through the room like a blade. She walked around the table and stood directly in front of Amy. You cannot have my daughter. I don't care how lonely you are. I don't care how long you've been dead. She is mine. She is alive and she belongs in the world of the living. Let her go, now. For a moment Amy's body was perfectly still. Then her face contorted, a struggle visible in the twisting features, as if two different people were fighting for control. And then Amy's eyes rolled back in her head, showing only whites, and she collapsed forward onto the table. Eleanor caught her before she hit her face on the plate. Amy. Amy's eyes fluttered. When they opened, they were normal again. Confused, frightened. Young? Mum? Amy's voice was her own again. Small, scared, the voice of a child. What happened? Why is everyone staring at me? Baby, do you remember anything? Amy looked around at the faces of her family, at Dr. Reed with his recorder, at Dr. Carter standing in the doorway with an expression of professional horror. I don't remember. I was eating dinner and then I heard his voice, the old man. He was talking, but I couldn't. Amy's face crumpled. I couldn't make my mouth work. He was using my mouth. Mum, he was inside my head. Eleanor gathered Amy into her arms, holding her tight, while Amy sobbed against her shoulder. Dr. Reed turned off his recorder. He looked at Dr. Carter. You saw that. I saw it. Carter's voice was shaken. That wasn't dissociation. That wasn't trauma response. That was... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Possession, Reed said quietly. That was possession. Amy interview. That was the first time Walter spoke through me, but it wasn't the last. Over the next week, it happened again and again. Sometimes I'd be aware of it trapped inside my own head, feeling my mouth move and my voice speak, but unable to control it. Sometimes I'd just blank out, like falling asleep suddenly. And when I came back, minutes or hours would have passed and everyone would be looking at me with fear in their eyes. Narrator Dr. Reed immediately began researching. He called every contact he had in the paranormal research community. He consulted with religious authorities, psychologists, and other investigators who had dealt with cases of alleged possession. The consensus was troubling. If this truly was possession and the evidence was becoming difficult to deny, then Amy was in serious danger. Possession cases, when genuine, could lead to severe psychological trauma, physical harm, or in the worst documented cases, death. Reed contacted the Catholic Church. While he himself was not religious, he knew that the Church had the most extensive historical documentation of possession cases and exorcism procedures. On September 14th, Father Michael Brennan arrived at 284 Green Street, narrator. Father Brennan was 54 years old and had been a priest for 26 years. He'd never performed an exorcism, but he'd been trained in the procedures. He'd also studied psychology and approached claims of possession with healthy skepticism. Most cases turned out to be mental illness fraud or misunderstood natural phenomena. But after spending 3 hours at the Thornton house, interviewing the family, listening to Dr. Reed's recordings, and witnessing a 10-minute episode where Amy spoke in Walter Grimm's voice, Father Brennan's skepticism evaporated. "This child is either an extraordinarily talented actress," Brennan said to Eleanor and Dr. Reed, "or she is genuinely being influenced by an external entity. And given everything you've documented, everything the police witnessed, everything I've seen today, I believe it's the latter." "Can you help her?" Eleanor asked. "Can you do an exorcism?" "I'm going to be honest with you, Mrs. Thornton. Exorcism is a last resort. It's dangerous, potentially traumatic, and it requires extensive approval from the diocese and ultimately from Rome. That approval process can take months." "We don't have months," Eleanor's voice rose. "That thing is inside my daughter. It's getting stronger. Yesterday she was gone for 20 minutes, just blank, not responding, and when she came back she had no memory of it at all. What if next time she doesn't come back?" Brennan held up his hands. "I understand your fear, I do, but there are steps we can take before a full exorcism. I can perform a blessing of the house and a prayer of protection for Amy. I can also contact Bishop Richard Alvarez. He has experience with these matters. Let me bring him here to assess the situation." Narrator. On September 17th, Bishop Richard Alvarez arrived. He was 65 years old with silver hair and calm, intelligent eyes. He'd been involved in 4 previous exorcism cases, 3 of which turned out to have natural explanations. The 4th, a case in Brighton in 1968, had convinced him that demonic possession was real. Bishop Alvarez spent 2 full days at 284 Green Street. He observed Amy. He prayed over her. He spoke with her when she was herself and to Walter Grimm when the entity manifested. On September 19th, he gave his assessment. "This is not demonic possession," Alvarez said, "or at least not in the traditional sense. The entity identifying itself as Walter Grimm does not exhibit the characteristics of a demon. It's not inherently evil. It's not trying to harm Amy, though it is causing her harm unintentionally. What we're dealing with is what's called oppression, a spirit so attached to a person or place that it begins to exert control. Amy is being oppressed by Walter Grimm's spirit." "Is that better or worse than possession?" Eleanor asked. "Different," Alvarez said. "Potentially easier to resolve, but also more unpredictable. Demons follow certain rules. Human spirits are more erratic. Walter Grimm was a human being who died lonely and frightened. His spirit has remained here, growing more desperate over the decades. Now he's found Amy, a sensitive child, and he's latched onto her because she represents what he lost: youth life, companionship. How do we get him to let go? I'm going to perform a ritual blessing tonight. If that doesn't work, we'll need to proceed to formal exorcism, which I am prepared to authorize given the severity of the case." Narrator. That evening, September 19th at 7 o'clock, Bishop Alvarez performed the blessing ritual. He brought holy water, blessed oils, a crucifix, and his prayer book. Father Brennan assisted him. Dr. Reed observed and documented everything. Eleanor and her family were present. Amy sat in a chair in the living room, Sarah holding one of her hands, Eleanor holding the other. Alvarez began the prayers in Latin, sprinkling holy water throughout the room. "Exorcizo te omnis spiritus immunde." For the first 15 minutes, nothing happened. Amy sat quietly, eyes downcast, breathing steadily. Then the temperature began to drop. Dr. Reed's thermometer registered it immediately, 22 degrees Celsius to 18, then 15, then 10. The breath of everyone in the room became visible. Alvarez continued praying, his voice strong and steady. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. The lights in the living room flickered. Once, twice. Then they went out completely. In the darkness they heard it. A sound from upstairs, a roar, not words but pure rage. The sound shook the walls, rattled the windows. Tommy screamed. Michael grabbed his mother. Sarah held Amy's hand tighter. Alvarez raised his voice, shouting the prayers over the sound. Father Brennan joined him. And then Amy began to convulse. Her body jerked violently. Her back arched until only her head and heels touched the chair. Her mouth opened wide, impossibly wide, and from her throat came that roar again, the same sound from upstairs, but now coming from Amy's small body. Eleanor tried to hold her, but Amy's strength was enormous. She threw her mother back with one arm. It took Dr. Reed and Father Brennan both to pin Amy's arms to the chair. "It's trying to get in," Amy's voice, her real voice, screamed from her distorted mouth. "Mom, it's inside me, I can't fight it." Bishop Alvarez placed his crucifix on Amy's forehead. "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to release this child." Amy's body went rigid. Her eyes rolled back, showing only whites, stared at nothing. Foam appeared at the corners of her mouth. Then, as suddenly as it started, she went limp. The lights came back on. The temperature began to rise. Amy opened her eyes, normal now, not rolled back. She looked at Bishop Alvarez. "Father," her voice was barely a whisper. "I saw him, Walter Grimm. He's so angry, so sad, he doesn't want to leave. He says this is his house." Alvarez wiped the sweat from his forehead. "The blessing has weakened his hold, but it hasn't broken it. Mrs. Thornton, I'm going to contact the Vatican tonight. I'm going to request authorization for a formal exorcism. Given what I've witnessed here, I believe they'll grant it quickly." Narrator: Over the next 2 days, September 20th and 21st, the activity in the house intensified as if Walter Grimm were mounting a final assault before the exorcism could take place. Objects flew through rooms with violent force. A ceramic plate shattered against the wall inches from Dr. Reed's head. Books launched themselves off shelves. Furniture moved and overturned. The fire started again, small flames appearing on papers, on curtains, on the sofa cushions. Each time the family would rush to extinguish them, and each time the flames would die out on their own before causing serious damage, as if the entity were testing boundaries rather than trying to actually destroy the house. Water continued to appear in puddles throughout the house, not dripping from ceilings or leaking from pipes, but simply materializing. Large pools of ice-cold water on floors where seconds before there had been nothing. And Amy began to change more dramatically. Her personality would shift multiple times per day. Sometimes she was herself frightened, crying, begging for help. Sometimes she would go blank, eyes open but unseeing, body present but mind absent. And sometimes Walter Grimm would take over completely, speaking through her in his rough-aged voice, saying things an 11-year-old girl couldn't possibly know. Amy interview. I started losing time. Whole chunks of my day would just disappear. I'd be sitting at breakfast, and then suddenly it would be dinner time and I'd have no memory of the hours in between. Mom told me later that during those blank periods, Walter would take over. He'd walk around the house like he owned it. He'd touch things, examine objects, talk to people as if he had every right to be there, because in his mind he did have that right. It was his house. The scary part was I could sometimes feel him even when he wasn't in control, like a presence in the back of my mind, watching, waiting. Learning how to push me aside more easily. Narrator. On September 22nd, Bishop Alvarez received authorization from the Vatican for a formal exorcism. It would take place on September 25th, giving the bishop 3 days to prepare. But before the exorcism could happen, something occurred that would shock even Dr. Reed, who thought he'd seen everything this case could produce. On the evening of September 23rd at approximately 10 o'clock, Amy was sitting in the living room with her family. Dr. Reed was there along with Tom Hayes and Chris Morgan, who'd been documenting the case throughout. Amy had been quiet all day, present but withdrawn, speaking rarely, eating little. Then, without warning, she stood up. "Amy," Eleanor said, "where are you going?" Amy didn't respond. She walked toward the stairs. "Amy, stop. You're not supposed to go upstairs." But Amy continued walking. Her gait was strange, slow, deliberate, almost shuffling, like an old person walking with stiff joints. Eleanor moved to stop her, but Dr. Reed held up his hand. "Wait. I want to see what happens." They followed Amy as she climbed the stairs. She moved with purpose, as if being guided. At the top of the stairs, she turned and walked directly to Sarah and Amy's bedroom, the room where Walter Grimm had died. Amy pushed open the door and entered. The room was dark. Amy didn't turn on the light. She walked across the room to the old wooden chair that sat beside the wardrobe, the chair where Walter Grimm had been sitting when he died. Amy sat down in the chair, and then she simply stayed there, sitting, perfectly still, staring straight ahead at nothing. "Amy," Eleanor called from the doorway. "Sweetheart?" No response. Dr. Reed entered the room slowly, Chris Morgan behind him with his camera. "Amy, can you hear me?" No response. Reed moved closer. He knelt down in front of Amy to look at her face. Her eyes were open but unfocused. She was breathing but slowly, as if in a trance. "She's gone," Reed said quietly. "Amy's not here right now. Something else is controlling her body." As if responding to his words, Amy's head turned. Her eyes focused on Reed, and when she spoke, it was Walter Grimm's voice. "I died here, in this chair. This is where I sat when my head burst open. This is where I died alone while everyone forgot about me." "Walter," Reed said carefully, "you need to let Amy go. She doesn't belong to you. She came to my room." The voice was anguished. "She touched my things. She slept in my bed. She's mine now. She's 11 years old. She's a child. You can't keep her." Amy's face, Walter's expression twisted with rage and pain. "I've been dead for 53 years. Do you know what that's like? 53 years of nothing. Darkness, silence. Watching people live in my house but never seeing me, never knowing I'm here. And then this girl, this bright, alive girl, she saw me. She heard me. She's the first person in 53 years who knew I existed. I understand you're lonely. You understand nothing." Amy's body stood up from the chair with such force that Reed stumbled backward. "You're alive. You have people around you. You have a world. I have nothing. Just this house. Just these rooms. Just the memory of dying alone." Amy's body began to shake. Her hands clenched into fists. And then something happened that would be captured on Chris Morgan's camera and become one of the most controversial pieces of evidence in the entire case. Amy began to rise off the floor, not jumping, not standing on her toes, but floating, levitating. Her body lifted smoothly upward until her feet were 40 centimeters off the ground. She hung there in the air, arms at her sides, head tilted back, eyes rolled up, showing only whites. Eleanor screamed, "Amy!" She lunged forward to grab her daughter, but Dr. Reed held her back. "Don't touch her! We don't know what will happen!" Chris Morgan's camera clicked rapidly, capturing multiple shots. The flash illuminated Amy's floating form in stark bursts of light. Amy, or Walter Grimm, or whatever was controlling her body, began to speak. But now multiple voices came from her mouth at once. Her young girl's voice, Walter's old man's voice, and something else, something that sounded like wind or static or a dozen whispers layered together. "She will stay with me. I will keep her. We will be together forever in this house. Mine." Amy's body convulsed in midair. Her back arched further, impossibly far, as if her spine might snap. And then she simply dropped. She fell straight down, but somehow landed on her feet, stumbling but not falling completely. Her eyes rolled forward again, becoming normal. She looked around in confusion. "Mum, why am I upstairs? I thought I was downstairs watching telly." She had no memory of walking upstairs, sitting in the chair, levitating, or speaking. The entire episode, 15 minutes long, was gone from her consciousness. Narrator Dr. Reed played back the recordings for Bishop Alvarez that night. He showed him Chris Morgan's photographs of Amy floating in the air. Alvarez's face was grave. "This is the most clear-cut case of possession I've ever encountered. That child is in extreme danger. We cannot wait until the 25th. We need to perform the exorcism tomorrow, September 24th. Can you get it authorized that quickly?" "I'm not waiting for authorization. I'm invoking emergency authority. If the Vatican objects later, I'll take full responsibility, but we're running out of time. Every day Walter Grimm gets stronger. Every day Amy's hold on her own body gets weaker. If we wait much longer, we might not be able to bring her back at all." Narrator. September 24th, 1977. 7 o'clock in the evening. The living room of 284 Green Street had been transformed into a makeshift chamber for exorcism. Religious items were positioned throughout the room: crosses, holy water, blessed candles. Bishop Alvarez and Father Brennan wore their formal vestments. Dr. Reed had his recording equipment positioned to capture everything. Eleanor, Sarah, Michael, and Tommy sat on the sofa, as far from the exorcism site as possible, but still present. Alvarez had explained that family presence was important. Amy needed to know her family was there, supporting her, fighting for her. Amy sat in a straight-back chair in the center of the room. For safety, her wrists and ankles had been loosely bound to the chair with soft cloth restraints, not to hurt her, but to prevent her from harming herself if she became violent. She looked small and frightened. When Eleanor had explained what was going to happen, Amy had cried. "Will it hurt?" "I don't know, baby, but we'll be right here. We won't leave you." Now, as Bishop Alvarez prepared to begin, Amy looked at her mother one more time. "Mom, if I don't." "If something happens to me—" "Nothing is going to happen to you," Eleanor said firmly, though tears were streaming down her face. "You're going to be fine. We're going to get that thing out of you, and you're going to be fine." Bishop Alvarez placed his hand on Amy's head. "Amy, I need you to stay strong. When I begin the prayers, Walter Grimm is going to fight. He's going to try to stay inside you. You must resist him. Hold on to yourself. Remember who you are. Can you do that?" Amy nodded, though her face was white with fear. Alvarez opened his prayer book. "In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti." He made the sign of the cross. "Exorcizo de omnis spiritus immundi in nomine Dei Patris omnipotentis." Amy interview. "I'm going to tell you what an exorcism is really like. It's not like in movies, it's worse, because you're awake, you feel everything, and you hear two voices in your head, yours and his, fighting for control." When Bishop Alvarez started praying, I felt Walter immediately. He was angry, terrified. He knew what was happening, and he was clinging to me with everything he had. I could feel him inside my mind, wrapping around my consciousness like roots growing through soil, trying to anchor himself so he couldn't be pulled out. Narrator. For the first 10 minutes of the exorcism, Amy sat quietly in the chair. Her eyes were closed, her breathing steady. Bishop Alvarez continued the prayers, sprinkling holy water over her, holding the crucifix before her face. Then Amy's eyes opened. They were completely white. No pupils, no irises, just white. Her mouth opened and Walter Grimm's voice came out. "No, you cannot make me leave. I've been here 53 years. This is my house. The girl is mine. In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to release this child." Alvarez pressed the crucifix to Amy's forehead. Amy's body convulsed. Her back arched in the chair, straining against the restraints. The cloth bindings held, but Amy's strength was tremendous. The chair legs lifted off the ground from the force of her struggling. "She came to my room. She's mine." Walter's voice was a roar, now impossibly loud from Amy's small throat. "Amy," Eleanor called out. "Fight him. Don't let him win." Amy's head snapped toward her mother. Walter's voice. "Your daughter cannot fight me. I'm stronger. I've been dead for 53 years. She's just a child." But then the voice changed, became Amy's own voice, small and desperate. "Mom, I'm trying. He's so strong. I can't. Yes, you can. Eleanor was crying now, tears streaming down her face. You're my daughter. You're stronger than him. Fight. The voice changed again, becoming Walter's. She can't fight me. She's mine. If I can't keep her, I'll take her with me. We'll be dead together. That threat galvanized everyone in the room, Doctor. Reed moved closer. Father Brennan began praying louder, and Bishop Alvarez raised his voice to a shout, By the power of Christ, by the authority vested in me by the Church, I command you, Walter Grimm, to leave this child. Amy's body went into violent convulsions. Her head whipped from side to side. Foam appeared at her mouth. The restraints strained. Objects in the room began to move. Books flew off shelves. Picture frames fell from walls. The coffee table slid across the floor as if pushed by invisible hands. The lights flickered wildly. From upstairs came sounds, crashes, thuds, the roar they'd heard before. It sounded like the entire second floor was being torn apart. Amy's body arched so far backward that the chair tipped over. She crashed to the floor, still bound to the chair, still convulsing. Bishop Alvarez knelt beside her, holding the crucifix against her chest. Walter Grimm, you are not welcome in this child. You are not welcome in this house. Your time here is ended. You must go. No, no, no! The voice was anguish, desperate. I can't leave. I have nowhere to go. Just darkness, just nothing. Please, please let me stay. For a moment, everyone in the room felt it a wave of profound sadness and loneliness. Walter Grimm wasn't evil. He wasn't a demon. He was just a man who'd died alone and been forgotten, who'd spent 53 years trapped in the place where he died invisible and ignored until Amy had finally noticed him. But he couldn't stay. No matter how sad his story was, he couldn't possess this child. Walter, Bishop Alvarez said more gently, your suffering is real, but you cannot ease it by harming others. Amy is alive. She has a life to live. You must let her go. You must move on. There is no moving on. The voice was filled with despair. There's just darkness. I'm not going to heaven. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just going to stop existing. Please, please don't make me. I'm sorry, Alvarez said. And he meant it. But you have no choice. He placed both hands on Amy's head and shouted the final prayers, Deus creator et defensor generis humani qui hominem ad imaginum tuam formasti respice super hanc famulam tuam ami. Amy screamed. It wasn't Walter's voice. It was Amy's voice. Pure, raw terror. Her body arched one final time, pulling against the restraints with such force that the chair cracked. And then suddenly she went completely limp. The house fell silent. No more crashes from upstairs. No more objects moving. Even the flickering lights steadied. Bishop Alvarez kept his hands on Amy's head for another minute, completing the final prayers. Then gently he removed his hands. Amy, he said softly, can you hear me? Amy's eyes, normal again, showing brown irises and black pupils, opened slowly. She looked up at the bishop from her position on the floor, still bound to the overturned chair. Father, her voice was her own, weak, exhausted, but hers. Is it over? Is he gone? I believe so, child. How do you feel? Amy thought about it. Quiet. My head feels quiet. He's not there anymore. I can't hear him. Eleanor rushed over and began untying the restraints. As soon as Amy's hands were free, she pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her so tightly Amy gasped. Mom, I can't breathe. Sorry. Eleanor loosened her grip but didn't let go. You're okay. You're back. My baby, you're back. Dr. Reed checked his instruments. The temperature in the room was normal, 21 degrees Celsius. No more cold spots. No electromagnetic anomalies. Everything was reading as normal as it had been since before the haunting started. Bishop Alvarez Reed said, I think it worked. All my instruments are showing normal readings. Alvarez nodded, but he looked exhausted. Performing an exorcism took a tremendous toll both physically and spiritually. We'll need to monitor Amy over the next several weeks. Make sure the entity doesn't return. But yes, I believe the exorcism was successful. Narrator. That night, for the first time in nearly a month, the Thornton family slept in peace. Amy slept in her own bed, the bed she'd been afraid to go near for weeks. Sarah slept beside her. No knocking, no cold spots, no objects moving, no voices. The house was quiet. Amy interview. I slept that night. Really slept. For the first time since August 30th, I slept without fear, without feeling like someone was watching me, without hearing whispers in the back of my mind. When I woke up the next morning, I felt lighter, like a weight I'd been carrying had been lifted. Walter Grimm was gone, really gone. I couldn't feel him anymore. I thought it was over. We all thought it was over. We were wrong. Narrator. September 25th through October 10th were quiet. Dr. Reed stayed at the house for the first week, monitoring for any return of activity. Nothing happened. The house remained normal. Amy returned to school, trying to catch up on the lessons she'd missed. Eleanor went back to work. Life slowly returned to something resembling normal. But on October 11th, Eleanor began to notice something strange. She would wake in the middle of the night, always at exactly 2:17 a.m., the time when it had all started feeling like someone was watching her. She would look around her room and see nothing. But the feeling persisted. Objects in the house began to go missing. Small things, a hairbrush, a coffee mug, Eleanor's reading glasses. They would disappear and then reappear in odd places. The hairbrush in the kitchen, the mug in the bathroom, the glasses under the sofa cushions. Eleanor began to feel cold spots when she walked through certain parts of the house. Brief pockets of icy air that would appear and disappear in seconds. At first, she said nothing. She didn't want to frighten her children. They were just starting to recover from the trauma of the past month. She didn't want to set them back, but on October 15th something happened that Eleanor couldn't ignore. She was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing her teeth before bed. She glanced at her reflection and saw someone standing behind her. Not her children, not anyone in her family. A man. Old, gaunt, wearing clothes from decades past. Eleanor spun around. The bathroom was empty. She turned back to the mirror. The figure was still there in the reflection, standing right behind where she was standing, close enough that if he were real, she would feel his breath on her neck. But there was no one there. The figure in the mirror smiled. It was not a kind smile. Eleanor backed out of the bathroom, her heart racing. She slammed the door and leaned against it, trying to catch her breath. When she finally worked up the courage to look again, opening the door slowly, the bathroom was empty. The mirror showed only her own reflection. But now written on the mirror in condensation were words, "I'm not done yet." Part of the aftermath. Narrator. They say when you survive a haunting, when the exorcism works and the entity leaves, you're finally safe. You can move on with your life. The nightmare is over. But no one told Eleanor Thornton that some hauntings don't end with exorcisms. Some entities don't leave just because you tell them to. They just change tactics, find a new target, and wait. Amy interview 2025. Everyone thinks the story ended on September 24th with the exorcism, that Walter Grimm left and we were free. But that's not what happened. The exorcism worked. It got him out of me. But it didn't get him out of the house. And when he realized he couldn't have me anymore, he found someone else, someone who'd stood between us, someone who'd fought to save me, my mother. Narrator. Eleanor didn't tell her children about what she'd seen in the mirror. She wiped away the words, took a sleeping pill, and went to bed. But she didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house. And the house, which had been silent for 2 weeks, was making sounds again. Not the loud knocking they'd experienced before. Something subtler, quieter. A creak on the stairs when no one was walking on them. A door closing softly when everyone was asleep. The sound of breathing in empty rooms. Eleanor told herself she was imagining it. The past month had been traumatic. She was stressed, exhausted, probably experiencing some form of PTSD. These sounds were just her mind playing tricks on her. But on October 16th, she couldn't deny it anymore. She was at work doing her night shift at St. Mary's Hospital. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and Eleanor was walking down the empty corridor of the fourth floor, checking on patients. She passed by a window and caught her reflection in the glass. There was someone standing behind her. The same figure from the bathroom mirror, old, gaunt, angry. Eleanor spun around. The corridor was empty. She looked back at the window. The figure was still there in the reflection, standing right behind her reflection's shoulder. Walter Grimm. His mouth moved in the reflection. Eleanor couldn't hear the words, but she could read his lips. "You took her from me." Eleanor ran. She didn't stop until she reached the nurse's station, where 3 of her colleagues were having tea. She must have looked terrified because they immediately asked if she was all right. "I'm fine," Eleanor lied. I thought I saw something. It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing, and it was only going to get worse. Narrator. Over the next week, the phenomena targeting Eleanor intensified. She would wake at 2:17 a.m. every single night without fail. Not because of an alarm, not because of a sound. She would simply jolt awake at that exact time, her heart racing, feeling the weight of someone staring at her in the darkness. Objects would move when she was the only one around. A cup sliding across the kitchen counter when she turned her back. A book falling from a shelf as she walked past. Her coat falling from its hook onto the floor. Small things, subtle things, but constant. And the cold spots, those pockets of icy air, began to follow her. She would be cooking dinner and suddenly feel frozen air on the back of her neck. She would be walking up the stairs and step into a zone of cold so intense her breath would fog. But the worst part was the mirrors. Every time Eleanor looked into any reflective surface, a mirror, a window at night, even the darkened screen of the television, she would see him. Walter Grimm, always standing behind her, always watching. And slowly, day by day, he appeared closer in the reflections. At first he was across the room, then halfway across. Then right behind her. And on October 22nd, when Eleanor looked in the bathroom mirror, Walter Grimm's reflection was so close that it looked like he was standing inside her own body, his face peering out from behind hers. Amy interview. "I didn't know what was happening to my mum. She hid it from us so well. She kept going to work, making our meals, helping us with homework. She acted normal, but Sarah noticed something was wrong. Mum had stopped sleeping. She had dark circles under her eyes. She was losing weight. She would zone out sometimes, just staring at nothing with this haunted expression on her face. Sarah asked her if she was okay. Mum just said she was tired from work. But it was more than that. We just didn't know it yet." Narrator. On October 25th, Dr. Reed returned to 284 Green Street for a follow-up visit. He'd been checking in weekly since the exorcism, monitoring Amy's recovery and making sure the haunting hadn't returned. Amy was doing well. She was sleeping normally, eating normally, going to school, playing with her siblings. No signs of possession or oppression. No complaints of hearing voices or feeling Walter Grimm's presence. "She's made a remarkable recovery," Reed told Eleanor. "Whatever trauma the possession caused, she's working through it. Children are resilient." "That's good," Eleanor said. Her voice was flat, distant. Reed looked at her more carefully. "Mrs. Thornton, are you all right? You look exhausted." "I'm fine. Just working a lot of night shifts." "Are you sleeping during the day?" Eleanor hesitated just a fraction too long before answering. "Yes, of course." Reed didn't believe her. He pulled out his notebook. "Mrs. Thornton, I need to ask you some questions. Has there been any unusual activity in the house since the exorcism?" "No, everything's been quiet. No sounds, no objects moving. Nothing like that." "What about feelings, sensations, cold spots, feelings of being watched?" Another hesitation. Sometimes I feel like I'm being watched. But that's probably just because of everything we went through. I'm on edge." "Have you seen anything? Any apparitions or figures?" Eleanor's hands tightened in her lap. "Why are you asking me this?" Because in cases where an exorcism removes an entity from one person, especially in cases of oppression rather than demonic possession, the entity doesn't always leave entirely. Sometimes it just transfers its attention to someone else, usually someone who was involved in the exorcism, someone the entity feels wronged by. Eleanor stared at him. You think Walter Grimm has attached himself to me? I think it's possible, Mrs. Thornton. I need you to be honest with me. Have you seen him? Eleanor closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there were tears. In mirrors, in windows, any reflective surface. He's always behind me in the reflection, and he's getting closer. Reed's expression was grave. Why didn't you tell me immediately? Because my children just got their lives back. Amy is finally sleeping through the night. Sarah's stopped having nightmares. Michael and Tommy are playing again instead of being terrified all the time. I'm not going to drag them back into this nightmare because of me. Mrs. Thornton, this is serious. If Walter Grimm has transferred his attachment to you, then what we do another exorcism on me and traumatize my children all over again? If necessary, yes. No, Eleanor stood up. I can handle this. It's just reflections, just feelings. He can't actually hurt me. You don't know that. This entity tried to possess your daughter. It's already demonstrated that it's willing to cause harm to get what it wants. What does it want from me? I'm not a child. I'm not young and full of life like Amy. What could Walter Grimm possibly want with me? Reed was quiet for a moment. Then he said, revenge, narrator. That night, Reed went through his audio recordings from the exorcism. He'd reviewed them multiple times before, but now he was listening for something specific. Anything Walter Grimm had said about Eleanor. He found it at the 43-minute mark. Walter's voice speaking through Amy. The mother, she stood against me. She took the girl away. She will pay. And later, at the 58-minute mark, I'll find another way. I'll find another body. The mother is strong. She'll do. Reed had missed it before, focused as he'd been on getting Walter Grimm out of Amy. But now it was clear. Walter had intended to transfer to Eleanor all along. If he couldn't have the young, vibrant life of a child, he would take the life of the woman who defied him. Reed immediately called Bishop Alvarez. We have a problem. Narrator. On October 27th, Eleanor was cleaning the upstairs bedrooms. The children were at school. She was alone in the house. She was making Sarah and Amy's bed when she felt that now familiar sensation of cold air on her neck. Eleanor straightened up and turned around. Walter Grimm was standing in the corner of the room, not in a reflection, not in a mirror, actually standing there fully visible, solid-looking as any living person. He looked exactly as he must have looked on the day he died. An old man, 72 years old, gaunt and pale, wearing clothes from 1924. His eyes were dark and sunken, but they burned with an intensity that made Eleanor's blood run cold. You, he said. His voice was raspy, exactly as it had sounded coming from Amy's mouth. You took her from me. Eleanor backed toward the door. Get away from me. This is my house. I lived here for 53 years. I died here. And you and your family invaded my home. The girl was mine. I found her first, and you took her away. She's my daughter. She was never yours. I've been alone for 53 years. Walter's voice rose to a shout. 53 years! Do you understand what that means, trapped in this house, watching people live and die, and none of them seeing me, none of them knowing I exist, until that girl, until Amy. She saw me. She heard me. She was mine. Eleanor's hand found the doorframe. You need to leave. The exorcism got me out of her, yes, but it didn't make me go away. I'm still here. I'll always be here. This is my house. Walter took a step forward. But now, since you took the girl from me, I'll take something from you. Your peace, your sleep, your sanity. Day by day, night by night, I'll take pieces of you until there's nothing left. I'm not afraid of you. Walter smiled. It was a horrible sight. You should be. He vanished, not fading, not walking away, just gone as if he'd never been there at all. Eleanor stood in the empty bedroom, shaking. Her heart was racing so fast she thought she might have a heart attack. She stumbled out of the room and down the stairs, grabbing her coat and her purse. She couldn't stay in this house, not alone, not anymore. Narrator. That afternoon, Eleanor went to the public library and called Dr. Reed from the payphone. I saw him, not in a reflection, actually standing in the room. He was real. Dr. Reed, he was solid and real, and he spoke to me. "Mrs. Thornton, where are you?" "The library. I left the house. I can't go back there alone." "Stay where you are. I'm coming to get you. We need to discuss this with Bishop Alvarez immediately." 2 hours later, Eleanor was sitting in Bishop Alvarez's office drinking tea with shaking hands, telling him everything that had happened since the exorcism. Alvarez listened without interrupting. When Eleanor finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression troubled. "Mrs. Thornton, doctor." Reed was correct. Walter Grimm has transferred his attachment from Amy to you, and now that attachment is intensifying. We need to perform another exorcism. Will it work? The first exorcism got him out of Amy, but it didn't make him leave the house. This is a different situation. Walter is attached to you, but he hasn't fully possessed you yet. We can sever that attachment before it becomes possession, but we need to act quickly. The longer we wait, the stronger the connection becomes. Eleanor set down her teacup. "When?" "November 5th. That gives me a week to make preparations and to get proper authorization from the diocese. In the meantime, I want you to wear this." Alvarez handed Eleanor a small crucifix on a silver chain. "Keep it with you at all times. Don't take it off, not even to shower. And I want you to pray. Even if you're not particularly religious, the act of prayer can create a barrier between you and the entity." Eleanor took the crucifix. It felt warm in her hand, almost alive. What if he gets stronger before then? What if he takes control before we can do the exorcism? "Then call me immediately, day or night. I will come." Alvarez paused. "Mrs. Thornton, there's something else you need to know. I've been researching the property records for your house. Walter Grimm died on September 12, 1924. He was 72 years old. You are 38 years old now. I don't understand what that has to do with anything. If this pattern continues, if Walter continues to drain you the way he drained your daughter, there's a risk. In possession cases where the entity is the spirit of someone who died, sometimes they try to equalize the situation. They try to make their victim the same age they were when they died." Eleanor felt ice in her veins. "You're saying he's trying to age me, to make me 72? I'm saying it's a possibility we need to consider, which is why we cannot wait. We do the exorcism on November 5th and we end this." Narrator Eleanor returned home that evening to find her children worried. Sarah had gotten home from school to find the house empty and her mother's coat missing. She'd feared something terrible had happened. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, hugging her daughter. "I had to meet with Dr. Reed and Bishop Alvarez. Everything's fine." But everything wasn't fine, and that night proved it. At 2:17 a.m., Eleanor woke up. She was not in her bed. She was standing in Sarah and Amy's bedroom, right next to Amy's bed, staring down at her sleeping daughter. Eleanor had no memory of getting up, no memory of walking upstairs, no memory of entering this room. She was sleepwalking. Or something was controlling her body while she slept. Eleanor backed away from Amy's bed, her hand clutching the crucifix Alvarez had given her. She whispered a prayer, just the Lord's Prayer, the only one she remembered from childhood, and fled the room. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. She sat in the living room lights on crucifix in hand, terrified of what might happen if she closed her eyes. Amy, interview. I woke up that morning and went downstairs to find my mum sitting on the sofa, fully dressed, holding this crucifix like her life depended on it. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. Her eyes were bloodshot. Her hands were shaking, and when I said, "Good morning, Mum," she jumped like I'd screamed at her. That's when I knew something was wrong, really wrong. Narrator. Over the next week, October 28th through November 4th, Eleanor's condition deteriorated rapidly. She stopped sleeping entirely. She was terrified that if she slept, Walter Grimm would take control of her body. She drank endless cups of coffee, pinched herself to stay awake, even asked Dr. Reed for stimulants. She began to see Walter Grimm everywhere, not just in reflections, standing in corners of rooms, sitting in chairs when she entered a room, walking behind her on the street, always watching, always there. Her weight dropped dramatically. She was eating, but the stress and lack of sleep were burning through her body's reserves. Her clothes hung loose on her frame, and most disturbing of all, she began to look older. Her face developed lines that hadn't been there before. Gray appeared in her hair almost overnight. Her hands developed age spots. Her skin took on a papery quality. Dr. Reed documented everything with growing alarm. On November 3rd, just 2 days before the scheduled exorcism, he took photographs of Eleanor and compared them to photographs from September. The difference was shocking. In 6 weeks, Eleanor had aged what looked like 15 years. "We need to move the exorcism up," Reed told Alvarez on the phone. "She's running out of time." "I've already arranged for tomorrow, November 4th, Alvarez said. "I couldn't wait until the 5th. She's deteriorating too quickly." Narrator, November 4th, 1977, 6 o'clock in the evening. For the second time, the living room of 284 Green Street was prepared for an exorcism. But this time, the children were not present. Alvarez had insisted they'd been traumatized enough by Amy's exorcism. They didn't need to witness their mothers. Eleanor had arranged for the children to stay with Mrs. Patterson next door for the evening. She'd told them she was having a meeting with church officials about what had happened to Amy. The children had accepted this explanation, though Sarah looked suspicious. Now Eleanor sat in the same chair Amy had sat in 6 weeks earlier. Her hands gripped the armrests. She was terrified but determined. Bishop Alvarez, Father Brennan, and Dr. Reed were present. Alvarez had also brought 2 other priests, Father James Cooper and Father Thomas O'Brien, for additional support. "Mrs. Thornton," Alvarez said gently, "before we begin, I need to ask you, are you experiencing any blackouts? Any periods where you lose time or have no memory?" "Yes. Last night I woke up at 4 a.m. in the kitchen with no memory of going there. And 3 days ago I apparently had an entire conversation with Sarah that I don't remember at all. She told me about it later, and I had no idea what she was talking about. That's what I feared. The entity is beginning to take control more frequently. We need to start immediately." Alvarez opened his prayer book. The other 3 priests formed a semicircle around Eleanor's chair. Dr. Reed stood at a distance, recording everything. "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit," Alvarez began. "We are gathered here to free Eleanor Thornton from the oppression of the spirit known as Walter Grimm. By the power and authority of the Church, we command this entity to release its hold on this woman and depart from this place forever." For the first 15 minutes, nothing happened. Eleanor sat quietly, breathing steadily, holding onto her crucifix. Then the temperature began to drop. Dr. Reed's thermometer showed the change, 20 degrees Celsius to 15, then 10, then 5. Everyone's breath became visible in the cold air. Eleanor's hands began to shake. "He's here," she whispered. "I can feel him. He's angry." "Stay strong," Alvarez said. "Hold on to yourself. Don't let him in." "I'm trying, but he's so strong. He's pushing at me, like he's trying to force his way into my mind." Alvarez began the prayers in Latin, his voice strong and commanding. The other 3 priests joined him, creating a wall of sound that filled the room. Eleanor's shaking intensified. Her eyes began to roll back. "No," she gasped. "No, I won't let you." Her voice changed mid-sentence, became deeper, older, masculine. "She's mine now." Walter Grimm's voice came from Eleanor's mouth. "You took the girl from me, so I took the mother-fair exchange." "You have no right to this woman," Alvarez shouted. "Leave her immediately." "I've been dead for 53 years. 53 years of nothing, and now I finally have a body again, a strong living body, and you want me to give it up? Never." Eleanor's face contorted, showing an expression that was entirely unlike her own. Her features seemed to rearrange themselves, taking on a masculine cast and aged quality. Mrs. Thornton Alvarez addressed Eleanor, directly ignoring Walter. "I know you're still in there. You must fight him. Push him out. This is your body, not his." Eleanor's voice, her real voice, emerged weakly. "I'm trying, but he's everywhere. In my head. I can't push him out." "Yes, you can," Dr. Reed spoke up, stepping closer despite the danger. "Eleanor, you are stronger than him. You saved your daughter, you can save yourself." "My daughter." Eleanor's voice grew slightly stronger. "Amy, my children, I need to be there for them." "No!" Walter's voice roared through Eleanor's mouth. "You don't need them. Stay with me. We'll be together forever in this house." "This isn't my house," Eleanor's voice fought back. "This is my house. I pay rent here. I raise my children here. You are the intruder. Get out." The struggle was visible in Eleanor's body, her features shifting between her own and something older, masculine other. Her hands clenched and unclenched. Her body rocked back and forth in the chair. Bishop Alvarez placed his crucifix on Eleanor's forehead and began the final, most powerful prayers of the exorcism ritual. "By the power of Christ, by the authority of the Church, by the love of the Blessed Virgin Mary, I command you, Walter Grimm, to release Eleanor Thornton and depart from this place. You are not welcome here. You have no claim here." "Go!" Eleanor screamed. It was a sound that combined her voice and Walter's voice and something else entirely, a sound of pure anguish. And then, suddenly, she collapsed forward in the chair, gasping for breath. The temperature in the room shot up, returning to normal in seconds. The oppressive feeling that had hung over them vanished. Alvarez kept his hand on Eleanor's head for another minute, completing the final prayers. Then he asked softly, "Eleanor, are you with us?" Eleanor raised her head. Her face was her own again, exhausted, tear-streaked, but her own. "He's gone," she whispered. "I can't feel him anymore. He was inside my head and my thoughts, and now—" Silence, beautiful silence. Amy interview. When Mom came home that night, she looked different. Exhausted, yes. Shaken, yes. But lighter somehow. Like a weight had been lifted. She hugged each of us so tight I thought my ribs might crack. And she cried. She just held us and cried and told us she loved us over and over. We didn't know what had happened. Not then. She told us later, years later, about Walter Grimm transferring to her, about the exorcism, about how close she'd come to losing herself entirely. Narrator. November 5th through November 20th, 1977, were the most peaceful days the Thornton family had experienced since moving into 284 Green Street. No knocking on walls, no objects moving, no cold spots, no apparitions in mirrors. The house was quiet, normal, just a house. Eleanor slowly recovered. She began sleeping again, real, restful sleep. Her appetite returned. The premature aging that had frightened everyone began to reverse somewhat, though she never quite looked as young as she had before Walter Grimm attached himself to her. Dr. Reed continued to monitor the situation, visiting every few days. All his instruments showed normal readings. No temperature anomalies, no electromagnetic disturbances. Whatever paranormal activity had plagued this house for nearly 3 months appeared to have finally ended. "I think we can call this case closed," Reed told Eleanor on November 20th. "Walter Grimm is gone. Both exorcisms appear to have been successful. The house is clear." "Are you sure?" Eleanor asked. "What if he comes back? I've documented enough cases to know the signs of ongoing haunting versus resolved haunting. This house is quiet, genuinely quiet. I believe Walter Grimm has finally moved on, or at least has released his hold on this place and on your family." Eleanor wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe the nightmare was truly over. But that night something happened that would shatter that belief. Narrator. Eleanor woke at 2:17 a.m. She had gotten used to waking at that time. It had become almost a habit, even after Walter Grimm was gone. But tonight felt different. There was a weight to the air, a tension. She got up and walked downstairs to get a glass of water. As she passed through the living room, she glanced at the window. In the reflection in the dark glass, she saw him, Walter Grimm, standing behind her, just like before. Eleanor spun around. Nothing there. She looked back at the window. He was still in the reflection, but now he was smiling, and he was holding something. A pocket watch, silver with engraving on the case. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She'd found that watch last week while cleaning out the upstairs wardrobe. It had been hidden in the back behind old clothes. The engraving on the case read, Walter Grimm, 1871. She'd thrown it away, put it in the rubbish bin, watched the bin men take it away. But in the reflection, Walter was holding it, and the watch face showed 2:17 a.m. The hands weren't moving, frozen at 2:17. As Eleanor watched, Walter opened his mouth in the reflection and spoke. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read his lips. "I'll never leave." Then he vanished from the reflection. Eleanor backed away from the window, her heart racing. She turned to go back upstairs and nearly screamed. On the living room table, sitting in plain view, was the pocket watch, the one she'd thrown away a week ago, the one that should be in a landfill somewhere. It was sitting there, face up, hands stopped at 2:17. Eleanor didn't touch it. She backed away, went upstairs, and locked herself in her bedroom. She didn't call Dr. Reed. She didn't call Bishop Alvarez, because she knew what they would say, another exorcism, more trauma for her children. And what good had the exorcisms done? Walter kept coming back. Maybe Eleanor thought he would always come back. Maybe some hauntings never truly end. Narrator. On November 23rd, Eleanor made a decision. They were leaving 284 Green Street. She couldn't afford to break the lease. She couldn't afford to move to a new house. But she couldn't stay here anymore, not with Walter Grimm still present, still watching, still waiting. Eleanor called her Aunt Margaret, who lived in Essex, 45 kilometers from Enfield. Margaret had a large house and had always said Eleanor and the children were welcome to stay if they needed to. "We need to leave London for a while," Eleanor told her. "Just until I can sort some things out." "Could we stay with you?" Margaret agreed immediately. On November 25th, Eleanor packed up her family's belongings. She told the children they were going to stay with Aunt Margaret for a few weeks, maybe a month, a little holiday, a change of scenery after everything they'd been through. The children were excited. They didn't question it. They were happy to leave 284 Green Street behind. As Eleanor locked the front door for what she hoped would be the last time she looked back at the house, in the upstairs window, Sarah and Amy's bedroom window, she saw a figure standing. Walter Grimm. Watching them leave. Eleanor turned away and didn't look back again. Narrator. The Thornton family settled into Margaret's house in Essex. It was larger than their house in Enfield in a quieter neighborhood. The children thrived. Amy's nightmares stopped completely. Sarah became more like her old self, cheerful, helpful, no longer constantly anxious. Michael and Tommy played outside for hours, something they had been too frightened to do in Enfield. Eleanor told herself they were safe now. They'd escaped. They'd left Walter Grimm behind in that house in Enfield. For 3 weeks it seemed like that was true. But on December 18th, 1977, at 2:17 a.m., Eleanor woke up. She was standing in the hallway of her aunt's house outside the bedroom where Amy was sleeping. She had no memory of getting up, no memory of walking here. And in her hand she was holding something, the pocket watch, the one she'd left behind in Enfield, the one she'd never touched after finding it on the table. The watch face showed 2:17 a.m. And as Eleanor stared at it in horror, the second hand began to move. Tick, tick, tick. From somewhere behind her she heard a voice, Walter Grimm's voice, as clear as if he were standing right there. "Did you really think you could leave me behind? I'm not bound to that house. I'm bound to you now. Wherever you go, I follow." Eleanor looked up and saw in the window at the end of the hallway Walter Grimm's reflection, not behind her this time, standing beside her, like they were together, and he was smiling. Amy interview, 25. We lived with Aunt Margaret for 6 months. Then we moved to a different house in Essex, nowhere near Enfield. We never went back to 284 Green Street, but the haunting didn't stop, not completely. Mum never talked about it, but I knew. I would see her wake up at 2:17 a.m. every single night. I would see her avoid mirrors. I would see her flinch at shadows. Whatever connection Walter Grimm had formed with her during those weeks of oppression, it never fully broke. He followed her for the rest of her life. My mum died on September 12, 1992, 15 years after the Enfield haunting. She was 53 years old. 53. The same number of years Walter Grimm lived in that house. The same number he'd been obsessed with. The doctors said it was a heart attack, sudden, unexpected. She'd been healthy, but her heart just stopped. She died at 2:17 a.m. I don't think it was a coincidence. Narrator. After Eleanor's death in 1992, Amy Thornton tried to move on with her life. She married, had a daughter of her own. She never spoke publicly about what happened in Enfield. The Daily Mirror articles from 1977 had made the case famous, but Amy stayed out of the spotlight. She named her daughter Emma after her mother's middle name. For years, everything was normal. No paranormal activity, no hauntings. Amy convinced herself that it was finally over. Walter Grimm had taken her mother. Surely that was the end of it. But in 2025, when Emma turned 11 years old, the same age Amy had been during the Enfield haunting, something began. Small things at first. Objects moving in Emma's room. Cold spots. The sound of knocking on walls at 2:17 a.m. And Emma started saying she could hear an old man's voice. He said his name was Walter. He said he'd been waiting. He said he'd followed the family because someone had promised to stay with him, and he'd never received what was promised. He'd waited 48 years, and now there was another girl, another 11-year-old, another chance. Amy interview crying. That's why I'm telling this story now, because it's happening again, to my daughter. The knocking started 2 weeks ago. Last week, Emma woke up with handprints on her wall, long, thin fingers, just like the ones in Enfield. And 3 days ago, Emma told me she saw him. An old man standing in the corner of her room. He told her his name was Walter Grimm. He told her he'd been waiting for her, because she's part of the family that lived in his house. And he wants what he was promised, companionship. Someone to stay with him so he won't be alone. I've called every paranormal investigator I can find. I've contacted the church. I've reached out to anyone who might be able to help, because I know what happens if Walter Grimm gets his hooks into you. I know what it's like to lose yourself piece by piece to something you can't see or fight, and I will not let that happen to my daughter. But I'm scared, because what if you can't escape some hauntings? What if some entities never give up? What if Walter Grimm will follow my family forever, generation after generation, always waiting for another chance? Narrator. The Enfield haunting officially lasted from August 30th, 1977 to November 18th, 1977, 80 days. During that time, more than 30 witnesses, including police officers, journalists, doctors, psychologists, and paranormal investigators, documented over 2,000 individual paranormal events. The police report filed by Constable Rachel Bennett remains on file in the Enfield Police Archives. The photographs taken by Chris Morgan have been analyzed by experts and show no evidence of tampering. The audio recordings made by Dr. Marcus Reed have been examined by sound specialists who confirmed that the voices on the tapes could not have been produced by the people present. It is one of the most thoroughly documented cases of paranormal activity in history. But documentation doesn't stop a haunting. Evidence doesn't end a curse. And some spirits, it seems, don't know how to let go. Eleanor Thornton died at age 53. She woke up every night at 2:17 a.m. for 15 years until the night she didn't wake up at all. Amy Thornton still wakes up at 2:17 a.m. She's done so every night for 48 years, and now her daughter Emma is starting to do the same. The house at 284 Green Street still stands in Enfield. It's been rented to multiple families since the Thorntons left. None of them stay longer than a year. The current tenants report knocking on the walls at 2:17 a.m. Objects moving by themselves, a figure of an old man appearing in mirrors, and sometimes they say they hear a voice, an old man's voice speaking in an accent from decades past. "I've been alone so long, won't someone stay with me?" Text on screen. Eleanor Thornton died September 12, 1992 at age 53. She died at 2:17 a.m. Amy Thornton still wakes at 2:17 a.m. every night. Her daughter Emma is now 11 years old. The knocking has started again. Final audio. Amy's voice, 2025. If you're watching this and you live in Enfield, if you've ever experienced something you couldn't explain at 2:17 in the morning, if you've ever heard knocking on your walls in groups of 3, you're not alone. Walter Grimm is still out there, still looking for someone to stay with him, still waiting. And if you hear knocking at 2:17 a.m., don't answer, because some invitations should never be accepted. Sound of 3 knocks. Thump, thump, thump. Silence. Then barely audible, an old man's voice whispers, 53 years, now 54, 55, 56. I count every year. I wait. And when I find the next one, I'll never be alone again. Fade to black. Narrator final message. This story is based on the real events that occurred at 284 Green Street, Enfield, between August and November 1977. Police reports, audio recordings, photographs, and medical records documenting these events are still on file and available for research. Have you ever experienced something similar? Have you heard unexplained knocking at the same time every night? Have you seen handprints that don't belong to anyone in your house? Have you felt like you're being watched by something you can't see? Leave a comment below and share your story. You might not be alone. And if you want to hear more true paranormal cases like this, one cases backed by evidence and witness testimony, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Because the truth is always stranger than fiction. And sometimes the truth is far more terrifying. This has been the Enfield Haunting 53 Nights of Terror. Thank you for listening. And tonight when you go to bed, try not to look at the clock if you wake up. Because if it says 2:17 a.m., someone might be waiting for you to notice them. Sleep well, if you can.